Welcome to this edition of the High Strangeness Factor on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. I'm your host, Steve Ward. On each episode of the High Strangeness Factor, while we explore all aspects of the paranormal and the unexplained, we put a special emphasis on the parallels and underlying patterns that seem to lie beneath the surface of all of these mysteries. Okay, tonight we've got a really special guest that I'm really looking forward to, and without any preamble, we're going to get into it. UK-based author and researcher Nick Hayes has spent almost 10 years photographing and filming in the infrared and the ultraviolet parts of the electromagnetic spectrum, documenting the strange invisible life forms, craft-like objects, and other phenomena that appear to be existing just beyond the range of normal human sight. Influenced by both the earlier photographic work of Trevor James Constable and Italian UFO research group, the GRCU, Hayes uses a whole range of attraction and detection methods, including a cloudbuster and a Geiger counter. In September 2016, his first book, Quest for the Invisibles, was published by the Book Tree in San Diego. The book covers the first 5 years of his work and features dozens of photographs and video stills of biological UFOs and other phenomena captured at his research area in Oxford. In 2017, he launched the Quest for the Invisibles website as a platform to present new evidence, and video footage can also be seen on the Quest for the Invisibles QFTI YouTube site. Hayes continues his photographic work and has recently co-written a 2-part paper entitled Positive Findings on Constable's Organotic. Is that right? Organotic? Or how do you
should be organic.
Organic.
Organotic.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good thing you're here. Organotic bioforms, and brings together photographic evidence from many different sources in support of Constable's original work in the 1950s. Nick, welcome to the High Strangeness Factor. Thanks for coming on.
Oh, hi, Steve. Yeah, thanks for inviting me on. That's great. Thanks.
Okay. As people now, you know, because we've talked a little bit off air, but I have always been fascinated by Trevor James Constable, and I'll have to tell you my story. Back in the 60s, we had, of course, we had our obligatory high school UFO club, and my buddy Kevin got a chance to go to the famous New York City. It was called the Congress of Scientific Ufologists at the Commodore Hotel in 1967 in New York City. Now, we were in, I think, maybe their first year in high school, and his mom was kind enough to offer to take me. However, my parents didn't want me running around with Kevin's mom in New York City, I guess, and never having been really out of Michigan at the time. So I had to live vicariously through Kevin. But Kevin worked with Saucer News, was the magazine that sponsored it. The famous James Moseley, who is known in saucer history, and so he came back. Kevin came back with a bunch of loot. And one of the books was this crazy book that I didn't know what to make of, called They Live in the Sky by Trevor James Constable. And I'm looking at this, and he's claiming that he has photographed these critters, as he called them, in the sky with infrared photography. And at the time, I didn't know whether he was a charlatan or crazy or what was going on. And even years later, when I read his follow-up book, The Cosmic Pulse of Life, he left some of the high strangeness behind. And we'll talk about the channeling that he did a little bit too, just to give people an idea. But he left a lot of that behind and thought and seemed to think better of it, of what had happened there. But still, I didn't know what to think of him. But finally, in about oh, 2003, I think it was. I started hearing him interviewed on the radio. And I thought, well, this guy isn't crazy. He's as lucid and as rational and intelligent as anybody. And also, I find out that he was an aviation military historian. Wrote
That's
maybe
right, yeah.
almost a dozen books. So anyway, that's my introduction to Trevor. And I think now you didn't really you had a really important UFO sighting that I think set you on your quest. Did you have any other experiences or interest prior to that, before you saw that thing in the sky?
No, not at all. I'd always been interested in sort of the UFO programs that are on telly, and I'd read a few books and a few magazines. But prior to that night when I saw that visible UFO, I'd never really given it much thought because being a musician for most of my life, I'd kind of gone off on the music thing. But this particular night, I was walking my dog Elfie. It was Christmas Day evening, 2008. It was about 7:30. It was a very, very foggy and misty night. There was ice on the ground. And my little dog Elfie was only about 6 months old, and we walked back from the park, and you couldn't see more than about 2 or 3 foot in front of you at some places because it's sort of out near the countryside. And Elfie wanted to go down an alleyway that we'd just been down. So reluctantly, I took him back down the alleyway, and while he was having a sniff around, I just started staring around. Now, next to me was a substation which had a pyramid-like top on it, and the effect from the lights and the mist, it looked really weird. And I was just thinking how much it reminded me of the Great Pyramid. And all of a sudden, I saw this like pink glow, pink to warm orange glow, coming from perhaps a couple of 100 feet away. And it was moving quite slowly, and all I could see was a glow and nothing else. And I thought, what's that? It's totally silent. It can't be a helicopter. Anyway, I stood there, and it seemed like it took an eternity, but eventually got nearer and nearer. And every now and then, as it entered a thinner pocket of fog, I could sort of see this spinning top shape, like with domed front, top and bottom on it. And basically, I stepped back a little bit because it was almost about to go straight over the top of me. I picked my dog up, stepped back, and I saw the thing in all its glory just for a few seconds. And it was probably about the size of a small van, and it was about 200 foot above the houses. And it just basically went diagonally straight across the top of the houses. You could hardly see it because it was so thick, the fog, that every now and then you'd see it. And so I couldn't follow directly. So I basically went round another road, and I managed to sort of get underneath it again and have it pass over me. And then I got to a really isolated area where there's some woods, and it seemed to slow down and almost stop. And it was really, really freaky. And I started getting a bit worried, and the dog was sort of whimpering. He was acting really strange. So I basically carried the dog
So
back
you
home.
think the
And then,
dog
yeah,
was definitely reacting to the thing in the sky?
I'm not deaf. No, he was only 6 months old at the time,
Oh,
and
okay.
he didn't like to walk too far. And it was very cold. It was like almost like freezing. Well, it was freezing. It had ice on the floor. But yeah, well, I took the dog home. Went to get my other dog Lucy. We went out looking for it. I couldn't see it. So I spent the next hour, and just as I was about to go in for the night, I saw it in the distance, but much higher. And I started trying to take photographs. I'd had a new camera that day for Christmas, and I'd mucked around all day with it and ended up leaving it at home, not thinking I'd need it. So I basically got the camera, never worked it before. It was a Casio XLM. Took loads of movie mode footage, loads of photographs, and nothing came out apart from a couple of one frame on movie mode footage, which showed the shape that I'd seen. And I had that enlarged, and it was definitely what I'd seen that night. And that started me off because the thing I saw, it looked like it reminded me more of a bioluminescent life form from the deep ocean because it appeared to be breathing. It was like rhythmic sort of pulsations of light. And at one point, I walked. It was only going at walking pace, and I sort of walked alongside it when I could, and I matched my breath with it. So I didn't know what I'd seen. I expected it to be in the papers the next day, which was Boxing Day, and I never heard anything, and I didn't know what I'd seen. So I was just very, very confused because it didn't look like a craft. It looked like it was some kind of a creature. Um,
Well,
I
well,
just didn't know what I'd seen.
that's really unusual. Those are very rare. Those kind of sightings, they do happen, those visible
Yeah.
sightings. But to see something that actually looked like a biological entity was pretty unusual.
Well, I'd never heard of anything like that until I discovered the work of Trevor James Constable. I didn't even consider that UFOs could be anything other than craft. So, for about sort of 6, 7 months, I kept going on the internet trying to find something similar to what I'd seen that night, and couldn't find anything. And then a friend of mine said to me, I mean, I was pretty much thinking about giving up, because I really wanted to try and film something else like that, but I didn't know where to start, didn't know anything. And a friend of mine showed me a video with a bit about Trevor James Constable, and that's the first time I'd heard of him. So I went straight out and bought his book, Cosmic Pulse of Life. And then after I read that, I actually wrote to him and told him that I was thinking of using a digital camera to film, critters. And he wrote back to me, and and encouraging me and everything. So that was it. 2010, I got my equipment ready and off I went, recording.
That's really good. I know that in there's one place in the Cosmic Pulse of Life, he refers to a book called The Attack on Everest by Hugh Rutledge, and Hugh
Yes,
Rutledge talks
yes,
about you know the passage
yes, yes.
Frank Smythe, I guess it was. I guess that's the way you pronounce his name. He saw.
Smythe, yeah.
Yeah, he's way up, like 27,000 feet. He sees some objects in the sky off in the distance. They aren't even really moving, but he said they were pulsating, and he's very careful about it. He looked around to see if he could identify certain areas. He looked away to see if the images followed his eyes to make sure it wasn't an illusion. And
Mm.
he said he even checked to see if they were pulsating with his heartbeat, because that might indicate that maybe he was experiencing a lack of oxygen being up that high and not seeing something. But he said one of them looked a little bit like it had a beak on it, and one looked like it had sort of rudimentary wings. So
Yeah,
it,
yeah, that's right. Yeah.
and it's so odd seeing that in a he writes in the book that he wasn't going to put this in the book, but the author suggested that he do, just to give a full record of what happened. But I guess some mist came in, he didn't see them again. But these are so rare, but we do seem to get some of these images with infrared photography now. uh, yeah. Now, so you discovered the cosmic pulse of life first before They Live in the Sky. How long did it take before you were able to get a copy of They Live in the Sky?
Well, I ordered them both at the same time, but I managed to get hold. I couldn't get hold of They Live in the Sky, and then a hardback copy came up about 3 or 4 weeks later, which was quite expensive. It's the original one, so I sent off for that. So it's probably about a month later after I had Cosmic Force of Life. But I kept reading Cosmic Force of Life over and over again, and then you kept sort of like looking, spending the odd hour looking into They Live in the Sky. And I decided to start from the beginning and read They Live in the Sky first, and then go back to Cosmic Force of Life. So
Yeah, it's fascinating, and let's we won't go into all these individuals right now, but let's just name some of the people that either influenced Constable or were his colleagues or whatever. I mean, you have Wilhelm Reich, who is the discoverer, whether you believe it or not, of orgone, which I guess you would call orgone is sort of like the idea of the life force, isn't it, or the
that's
ethers
right. Yeah,
somehow? Okay, but he invented
yeah,
what we call the cloud buster, which we're going to get into later, and that's where Trevor got into weather engineering. There were also people like Meade Lane. Meade Lane was, I think he was the founder of the Borderland Research Society or organization. By the way,
yeah, yeah.
I've got quite a collection. I've got some old Borderland. No, the Round Robin was the publication of the Borderland Research Society, and I have maybe half a dozen issues that where Constable has written an article back in about 1959. I'll have to send you some copies. It's pretty interesting.
Well, I
Uh,
saw some actually online. I think they've got them online as well. I found a website, the BSRF. Oh, well, I don't know if it's still called that, but yeah, I found a website and it had some old bits on that actually.
it's very hard to find them. I got a whole
Mm,
stack of them at a
wow.
fairly decent price. And you go through and you find all these gems. But he was also connected with he was influenced by Rudolf Steiner, who founded the Anthroposophy movement. Franklin Thomas was another major
Mm,
figure because Constable was struggling with some of this channeling that was going on. He was having a hard time handling it at the time. Franklin Thomas helped him. Who else? Dr. Ruth Drown, who I don't know a lot about, but she was a early pioneer of radionics, and the list goes on. I mean, it's just oh, and let's talk a little bit about the beginnings. They Live in the Sky. Now, George Van Tassel
oh yeah,
yes,
George. Yeah,
great character. He lived literally under a giant rock called Giant Rock,
Giant Rock. Yeah.
and he would hold those huge conventions in California with mostly contactees. Wouldn't you have loved to have been there to have attended some of those?
Oh yes, definitely. Every time I read about it and read about the lectures that Trevor talks about on that Glendale Boulevard, I'm thinking, oh gosh, I'd love to have been around then. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Well,
Yeah, it would have been great. I would love to have been there.
he
Yeah.
he was not. I remember writing somewhere that he was not too well received there, because he talked about the negative side of some of this, and these people at Giant Rock just wanted to hear about the beautiful Space Brothers and their messages of peace. But uh,
Yeah.
but he used to watch. George Van Tassel used to channel allegedly all these different entities in meetings under Giant Rock. He taught Trevor how to channel, and it was he had a rough time with it. But for a while, there's a
Yeah.
lot of messages that came through the in They Live in the Sky, that I think when you read the Cosmic Pulse of Life, uh, where he thought better of. I mean, he thought that maybe some of these things were not legitimate and not maybe coming from a real source, more of a trickster aspect. Do you have any thoughts on that or any opinion on that?
Well, that's the thing. Yeah, I mean, he lost control of his body, didn't he? It says that he got
Yes.
up one morning and he went down the road like a robot. But yeah, I mean, I've always been very sort of careful about that. After I read, some of the things that Trevor had experienced. I mean, he channeled Ashtar, didn't he, and another being as
Yes.
well. Um, but I found it very interesting. But I took a bit of caution from that. I think I mentioned that in my book Quest Invisible. So I mentioned a bit about Trevor losing control. But yeah, it made me very cautious after reading that, because at first I was thinking, oh, that's great. But then I realised the implications, and that's
Right.
something that comes into my work as well.
Well,
Because some of these things that I photograph, they are telepathic, and
oh,
you make a link with them, you can't break them. You open doors and you can't close them. You've got to be very careful.
well, we'll definitely get into that later. So that'll be a teaser, and we'll have people stay tuned. But Trevor got some. I mean, he got crazy messages like the. You're familiar with the Darrow of Richard Shaver fame. Richard Shaver was the guy that claimed he was held prisoner in the caverns for 7 years, and by the evil Darrow. Okay, well, that's a
Yeah,
whole
yeah,
other amazing stories published at Ray Palmer. That's a whole other ball game. But he. Trevor asked Ashtar, and everybody has channeled Ashtar, I think, but he asked Ashtar about the
yeah.
Darrow, and he said, "Well, there's no more Darrow, but they've all reincarnated into scientists on the surface." And I'm thinking, well, that doesn't sound very good. But I think there's when I just actually reread some passages in Cosmic Pulse of Life today, and it seems like he was very dubious about some of the messages. He stopped that channeling. I don't think all channeling is created equal. I think there may be some that come from a higher vibration. I'm not no expert on it, but the other thing is that I have some fascinating correspondence between Gray Barker and Trevor James Constable, and most of it took place when Gray Barker was taking over of Saucerian Publications. He was taking over the publication of They Live in the Sky way back in about 59, early 60s or whatever. And
Yeah.
it's interesting, but there's a lot of asides in there. And you find out a constable who he thought very highly of Van Tassel earlier, but later on he thought that Van Tassel, if you read this correspondence, was being duped by, I forget what he said, false spirits or mischievous spirits or something like that. So it's very interesting to see the progression of him. Uh, but anyway, we'll get a little bit more into for the people that are listening. This whole area when Constable and who was it? James Woods, James or
Yeah, Dr. James Woods.
Doctor?
Yeah, yeah.
When they, yeah, do you want to talk about that a little bit when they first went out and did some of their research?
Well, that's right. Well, basically, Trevor James Constable first became interested in UFOs from a lot of the books that were around in the 50s, and he was very particularly interested in cases where UFOs had been picked up on radar but not seen by anyone.
Right.
So he realised that radar operates in the area that borders the infrared. So that's why he began looking in the infrared. But yeah, in the summer of 1957, Trevor James Constable and Dr. James Woods began driving at night to a remote area in the Mojave Desert, somewhere between Yucca Valley and Old Women's Springs, where they'd set up camp ready to begin their work at first light. At the time, they had standard cameras loaded with infrared sensitive film, and they were using, although sometimes they didn't use a filter, but a lot of the time they're using a 870 nanometer infrared filter. But what they do the star exercise as an attraction method to attract any potential UFOs to their position.
Let me just stop you there for a second. The now he mentions a guy named Ernest Lear, that wrote Man or Matter, and it talks about the visual ray. Is the visual ray idea, do you know, the same thing as the star exercise? He,
No. That's
oh, okay.
no. The visual ray is how yeah, you can pick them up with the visual ray. Trevor used a technique for seeing the invisible by relaxing his eyes, and
Okay.
the star exercise actually it's a repetition thing. I think Franklin Thomas suggested to him. Um, no, it wasn't Franklin Thomas, was it? No, it suggested to him that he should perform um, cyclical um, cyclical repetitions of the star exercise. Who was it? Yeah, it was Franklin Thomas suggested it to him. Yeah, because he didn't know how he could try and attract the UFOs to his position.
Was that
So
where you when you see the pictures where he's standing up on the rock and putting his arm out or something like that? Or is that
yeah, that's right.
okay? All right.
You stand in the star position. Yeah. I mean, it's an esoteric procedure by which the whole body and its life force can be strongly energized. And performance of the exercise is thought to send a regular pattern of bioenergetic pulsations into the ether, which was what he was hoping would attract the UFOs. So he would stand there doing on the rock with in the star shape, and then Dr. James Woods would act as a photographer. But Trevor also had a camera, at the ready as well. But it's just a matter. I mean, for instance, he would face a quadrant. You face the quadrant in which the sun is closest when you start the exercise. For instance, in the morning, he'd face east, and standing with his legs apart and arms parallel to the ground, he would oscillate his body across the north-south and the east-west lines of the Earth. And it was a matter of going round, like facing east and oscillating yourself across the north-south line, and then facing west and oscillating yourself across the north-south line, and then facing north and oscillating yourself across the east-west line, and then facing south and oscillating yourself across the east-west line. And you do 100 repetitions of those at a time, and that's the attraction method he used.
And do you have, is there a certain state of mind that you hold when you do that, or is it just mostly, you know, motor manipulation?
Well, I tried it a lot, but because I got back problems, I found it very hard, which is why I started using a cloudbuster. But I just basically closed my eyes, and you can feel sort of like a warm sensation in the palms of your hands every time you cross like the north-south or east-west line of the Earth. Um, it's quite a crazy thing to do, and I mean, I never caught. I took a lot of photographs after I'd done it, but I never actually caught anything. But I started suffering with really bad spine problems,
Okay.
so I kind of abandoned it. But he used it for about 10 years before he began using the Cloudbuster, and he got some great footage using it.
And didn't he start, I mean, he could actually sense when something was overhead or nearby and kind of aim the camera in that direction?
Yeah, which is something I do quite a lot of the time. Something that I've managed to kind of teach myself how to do. But what he would do, he would relax his eyes. It's something he learned when he was in the U.S. Merchant Marine. Because he served as a radio officer for 26 years, and it was used for objectifying ships coming over the horizon. And just a matter of relaxing the eyes to a point where you look past the sky rather than at it. And
Well,
basically, I use this technique, yeah, and you can see things in the invisible. You can see flashes of light, or a difference in a shimmering variation, say, to the otherwise blue sky. So
uh,
you get that is what he used,
oh, does
and
it
then he would
take,
take photographs in that direction.
does it take a long time to adjust to that? I mean, to develop that ability?
Yeah, I think everybody can do it, but it's just a matter of just practicing it and practicing it. But I began using a Geiger counter in the end as a detection, a way of detecting. I just found it was a lot easier because the sky in England, you don't get many blue skies over here. I
Yeah.
mean, it's been very hot recently, but it's normally cloudy. So it's very hard. There's so many clouds in the sky. It's very hard to concentrate. So this is why I started using a Geiger counter, which is what I got from the GRCU, learning about the GRCU in Cosmic Pulse of Life. They use
And,
Geiger counters, so
and
that's why I started using one. Yeah.
how does that register on the Geiger counter? What do you look for?
Well, basically, I've set the Geiger counter. The Geiger counter reads permanently, and normally it measures about zero point zero 0.09 microsieverts per hour, up to about 0.12. Now, I set mine for 0.20, which is a lot higher than the background radiation, and I set the alarm on it to vibrate. And basically, as soon as the reading goes over 0.20, which is sort of quite high, um, basically I take photographs in the direction that I'm holding the Geiger counter. It takes a bit of practice, but after a while, you tune in with it. And I've taken some great photographs like that. And that's all I use at night when I go out with the infrared camera. I just use the Geiger counter, and the moment I get a hit, whether it's at ground level or above me, I just take photographs in that direction.
That's
Um,
well, that's really interesting. Now, are they? are these things literally giving off some kind of radiation that could be harmful if people were too close and exposed a long period of time?
I believe actually that it's some kind of organotic charge.
Oh, okay.
It's an energy they're giving off because sometimes Trevor and Bocconi found that sometimes these biofilms would imprint themselves onto the actual film without them even taking a photo, sometimes through a closed shutter. It's a particular type of energy. It's a very strong energy they are. But I think it's orgone energy that they're made of. And I think that's what the Geiger counter is picking up on. Um,
So the ethers or the life force or however it's not well defined sometime, but it's something. So you don't think it's like actual radiation decaying isotopes or anything like that, but it's
I
something different.
I think yeah. I looked into a lot of different things and I thought, well, perhaps perhaps it is harmful because there are some quite high readings. But then um, I've come to the conclusion now that it's probably the excited orgone. It's the energy, their particular energy they're made of. When they come into the infrared, you see, you've got to realize some of these things, although the infrared is invisible, when I film things in the invisible, these things go into the invisible from somewhere else a lot of the time. They're not always visible in the infrared. And a lot of them are only visible if they're lit up by sunshine and reflecting it or from an infrared light source.
Do uh, um, do they change colors as they move in and out of the visible? Is there any
And
color
then,
change that you know
well, I
noted
don't really,
about?
not that I've noticed, no, when I film in the infrared, it's normally just a black and
Oh,
white
that's right.
film that I'm
You're not going
doing.
to see it anyway.
Um, No, no,
It,
not in the infrared. When I film in the ultraviolet with a camcorder, I do set the white balance and I muck around with things, and I can get sort of quite a nice picture that's not just like black and white. I can bring a bit of color into it, but that's a type, it's a totally different type of. Well, that's on the actual movie camera, on the video camera. So I get a bit more color in that. But these things do change their form. They do change, and between frames sometimes.
John Keel, who I have followed, I think John Keel was way ahead of his time. And
Oh, definitely. Yeah,
of course, those that don't know, everybody that listens to my show knows I'm talking about Keel all the time. But he was the author of the Mothman Prophecies, and in his
yeah,
book that really changed my thinking was UFOs Operation Trojan Horse. He talks about, he hypothesizes the superspectrum that most people don't see, and he talks about the objects sometimes phasing in and out of our reality, going through the color spectrum. And so, as they become visible, what is it? Red is the first band on visible light. I
yeah,
don't know, but and then it
yeah.
goes
Red
through
borders the infrared, yeah, up
right.
to
So
violet, and then
it's
you've got the ultraviolet.
right, and then you've got kind of the same idea. Um, so what was it? How did you proceed? You read Cosmic Pulse of Life, you read They Live in the Sky, and you thought that you were going to do this yourself. What kind of steps did you go through to develop the skill really of capturing these images in the sky?
Well, it wasn't easy. I read the book and I thought, here we go, and basically, luckily for me, I've got quite a big garden and it borders some other land. So I decided to sort of use that as my research area. And I used to go out and walk along an old railway line. But what I used to do when I first got my infrared camera, I'll just go out and stare up at the sky, just take hundreds of photographs. And I kept noticing tiny little things quite high that looked like spheres and various things. They're only in one shot. So I started thinking, oh, I've got to try and attract them a bit nearer. So I kept thinking, oh, I'll build a cloudbuster, so basically, I found some tubes that are in my sister's garage that she wanted to get rid of, some metal tubes. So I built a cloudbuster and used that as an attraction method. But for months and months, I didn't capture anything. I was just about to give up. I was out there for 7 hours a day sometimes, 3 or 4 days a week. I
Wow.
took well, not millions, thousands and thousands and thousands of photographs. Didn't catch anything. And then on one day, I thought I'm going to take three more shots for luck, and I took some shots, three shots exactly where the cloudbuster was aiming. And on the middle shot, there was like a critter-looking UFO with a hole through it. And it looked very much like one in Trevor James Constable's book, but it was quite small and very high. And that I knew then and there that I was onto something. So I just developed it from that, really. I started trying different techniques, filming a lot lower in the sky. And of course, I started filming in ultraviolet with a full spectrum camcorder with an ultraviolet filter on it. So I'd film in infrared and ultraviolet together, or sometimes ultraviolet and infrared. I've got an ultraviolet and infrared filter, and all in one. So I use various different filters, and it's just a matter of it's all trial and error, to be quite honest with you. But over the years, you sort of tune yourself into it. You become tuned into it. I think it's your intent as well. A lot of these things appear for you. It's almost like they know you're looking. Um, and that's true of the amoeba, the large amoeba bioforms that I filmed that are on the paper. I mean, they were a last minute addition to the paper, and you know, my dream come true, capturing something just the same as Trevor had captured back in 1957, a huge amoeba, and then getting the bonus of the blue amoebas, a week later.
Yeah,
So
I think you're right. I think intention has a lot to do with it. Now let's just talk a little bit about Wilhelm Reich. Uh, he actually studied under Sigmund Freud for a while, and
mm,
he had his own ideas, but well, we can't get into it too much, and I don't really understand it too much, but he felt he uh, discovered an energy that he called orgone, which, as we mentioned before, is essentially the life force or the ethers or whatever, and that he could build these organic accumulators. They were wood on the outside, metal on the inside, would track the
mm.
orgone and so forth. But there was also that was OR was the symbol for that. DOR was deadly orgone, and I forget exactly what happened there to make it deadly, but he got this concept of the cloudbuster, which, as you say, is a series of metal tubes. And don't they come to an end where they go to a hose and then go into the water
Yeah,
source?
basically, that's right. Yeah, they're just basically an array of parallel hollow metal tubes mounted on a turntable or some type of sort of pivoting assembly, and one end is grounded into running water, and the other end is directed straight, up towards the atmosphere. And its use magnifies the differentials in primary orgone and energy field that they say underlies the atmospheric movement. So this is why it can get rid of clouds,
Uh,
um, and also alter weather patterns.
right.
Well, create rain basically.
Yes. Have any of your experiments with the cloudbuster, have you ever altered the weather at all locally?
To be quite honest with you, I had a funny thing happen one day where a cloud suddenly appeared. Just one cloud, this like dark looking cloud appeared and off it went. And it was a completely blue sky. But no, I've not really noticed anything
Okay.
like that. I mean, it's not like I'm out there, permanently. I mean, I pack it away when I've finished. I perhaps use a cloudbuster for perhaps sort of like 4 or 5 hours nowadays, and then I probably won't do it for another week or so because I'm trying different types of photography, like nighttime stuff and long exposures, and trying to capture a lot of stuff at ground level as well. So I'm just quite busy, really.
Have you ever read Contact with Space by Wilhelm Reich?
No, I haven't actually. No, a friend of mine offered to lend it to me, but I haven't read it yet. No.
It's actually finally become available at for about $35. You can get it I got it for some years ago for $50 in kind of a spiral brown notebook. But prior to that, they were selling copies for about $900. So, but it's fascinating. Now the the just a little bit on the theory of the cloudbuster. The idea is that somehow it is pulling what orgone out of the atmosphere or concentrating it where the tubes are aimed, and it's pulled into the water somehow. Do you have any
Yeah, yeah,
better?
it's
Oh yeah,
yeah,
go ahead.
yeah. I mean, orgone energy is attracted to water, and it moves towards high concentrations of itself. Smooth fields of atmospheric orgone in the sky can be made to concentrate into eddies or dissipate, depending on where the cloudbuster is aimed. Um, but basically, it's almost like it's unsticking the clouds. It's the orgone energy. It's basically charging the orgone energy, and it seems to bring it back down into the water. It's a bit like Trevor describes with the I-beam as well, a similar thing where you can bust clouds looking at them. I think that's mentioned in Cosmic
Right.
Pulse of Life. Yeah, it's
So
a similar sort of thing, and it's the same as acupuncture. It's very similar to acupuncture because you got the hollow metal needles that are put into the body, and it's drawing in energy. To
okay.
affect the energy of the body. It's a similar sort of thing to that.
So how do you know the idea? What is the theory where this apparatus would attract some of these sky creatures, which are actually living beings that what did he call them? Well,
Critters.
yeah, critters or ether beings or something like that. But any idea how he felt that this apparatus would pull in these kinds of creatures?
Well, I think with Wilhelm Reich, I think he noticed when he was using Cloudbuster, glowing sort of like by UFOs basically in the sky. And I think he aimed his cloudbuster at one, and it kind of fizzled out.
Yes.
So I think that I think that's what Trevor realised, that it would attract them. So Trevor sort of I think he discovered the work of Wilhelm Reich through his daughter Eva,
Right.
and I mean he started building cloudbuster. I think it was about May 1968. He began using the cloudbuster in place of the star exercise as an attraction technique.
So anyway, I don't know. A lot of people won't know what to make of Wilhelm Reich, if he was crazy or if orgone is a real thing or not. But it does seem to create a real process, a real thing is going on. And you'll find Contact with Space fascinating because when he moved up to Maine, Wrangley, Maine, I guess it was, to start his institute, he noticed that the landscape was becoming darkened and everything was dying, and he thought it had to do with the UFOs. He thought the UFOs were powered by orgone, and they were exhausting deadly orgone for whatever reason, and it was destroying the foliage and so forth. And he does describe that one day he saw these two lights in the sky, and he aimed the cloudbuster at them, and they would fade
Yeah.
away. Yes. So I don't know what was going on there, but it's a cosmic pulse of not cosmic pulse. The contact with space is fascinating, and unfortunately, about this time is when they threw Wilhelm Reich in jail because they didn't like what the FDA was it, I guess, were coming after him, and they didn't like the stuff he was doing. I mean, nowadays people play with all kinds of strange stuff, Reiki and crystals and so forth. And fortunately, we're not throwing them in jail. But back in those days, people like
Yeah.
Wilhelm Reich, and also Dr. Ruth Drown, who was a lady that Constable thought very highly of, and was the
Yeah.
the pioneer of radionics. I'd like to know more about that. But she was another one that was essentially persecuted by the government, and that's really too bad. But so so you that this was what started the process, and how did it how in the early days you've been doing this for about 5 years. Well, at least your first book covers the first 5 years.
The first
So
5 years, yeah,
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 yes,
that's from early 2010 when I very first started filming, and it goes right up to about September 2016. No, no, 2015. Summer 2015, I finished. I decided to write the book. Yeah, I took a break after 5 years of continual filming. You know, and that includes like well, I basically started looking into the ultraviolet a bit more than the infrared because I found I could record things at lower altitude in the ultraviolet and very, very strange things that I didn't seem to be able to film in the infrared. So I've just been experimenting, like kind of making my own rules up as I go, really.
well
Um,
that's how many people, I guess there are other people that have done this, but we don't know about them. Nobody else has written a book really. There was the that Italian group. They, I guess, got some remarkable uh, results. And what was their name? The G.
the GRC, yeah, that was Luciano Bocconi and the GRCU group. Yeah, they were an Italian research group based in Arenzano, Italy, and they had some 25 members in their group. They started work in 1976, and they're about the third Italian UFO group to begin using instrumental research in the infrared. Um, but basically, Bocconi was also part of the CUN, which was a central, was it ufology sort of organization, Italy's major centre for sort of UFO studies, and he contributed to many official magazines. But yeah, he got into Trevor. Basically, he wrote to Trevor after Trevor had given up his UFO work, and Trevor began sort of like chatting with him. I think they met up a couple of times. But it's very interesting. I read about Luciano Bocconi's book, UFO La Realtà Nascosta, which is UFO The Hidden Reality. I read about it in Cosmic Pulse of Life,
Yeah.
and I thought I've got to have that. And
Yeah,
basically,
I thought the same
yeah,
thing too, but you found one and I didn't.
I paid £350. I paid for
Oh
it,
my God, yeah, that's a
and that was
good.
that was in 2011.
Oh my God, that'd be 700-800 bucks over here, easy.
I,
Uh,
w- I wouldn't sell it for £10,000. I wouldn't sell that book
no,
for
no.
anything.
And I understand that there was some really spectacular photographs in there in the Invisible, which I mean, some things look a little bit like winged griffins or pterodactyls or something like that. Is that correct? I, I,
Um,
I read a reference to
yeah,
that somewhere.
Yeah, they caught some pterodactyl-like creatures. They found a whole load of stuff, including sort of entities with like halos and little horns. I mean, they haven't got all those pictures in there. The pictures in that book, which is in Italian only, by the way, but it's got 200 pages of photographs in there, and it's got photographs from a couple of different groups as well. But they caught everything. That paper that I've just written, the evidence that follows Constable's evidence, that is the GRCU evidence. Some of the best that I've managed to get for this paper.
Oh,
And it's quite diverse. It shows sort of like a sphere of light with these little bird-like things coming out from it. It's like it's like a 20-second, 40-second exposure, I believe. But it's a great photo. They took some great photographs, but unfortunately they kind of disappeared. I found out that all 25 members died around in the early 50s.
really?
Um, yeah, well, I've just written this paper with a friend of mine, Leon Southgate, and between us, we were trying to get permission to use some of Baconi's photographs, and we couldn't find anybody who was involved with him that was really alive that we could get hold of. But we found somebody who was basically working for the publisher of that book, UFO La Realtà Nascosta, and he gave us permission to use the photographs. But we want to get hold of the archive because there's 25 members, and they filmed with multiple cameras. They got multiple evidence, and we don't know where it's gone.
Oh man, if you could only get a hold of that. Yes, and
Yeah.
it's too bad that the book is only in Italian, for those of us that can't read or speak Italian.
I can't speak Italian. No,
Yeah.
I speak Arabic. A bit of Arabic, but I can't speak Italian. But it's very like English and French, though. You can sort of get I've been putting bits into Google,
Right.
just into
Oh,
the
okay.
Google language thing, because there's bits that information I really wanted to know for this paper. But this book is very, very rare, and most people don't know anything about the GRCU and Luciano Bocconi. And this is the idea of me writing this paper to basically offer evidence backing up Trevor's evidence, and also adding my own to it. So this is the whole reason I want to try and get Bocconi's work out there, the GRCU work,
That would be
and keep
phenomenal.
keep supporting Trevor's work. So we've had paper one published. Paper two is going to be published in another 2 or 3 weeks. So
So
yeah, no, I've got to keep pushing the work out there. You see, because my work is all the time. Everything I capture is just adding to to what they've got. Which is great. It's just more evidence that confirms that Constable was bang on with his work.
and eventually you expect to put out another book?
I shall do. I'm slowly working my way to another book called Hidden Reality myself, but
Okay.
it's just very time consuming. I mean, I've got a couple of dogs that do dog walking,
Oh yeah.
and I'm pretty obviously well, I struggle a little bit because of my back, but it takes a lot of time looking back through video footage, and I find my eyes are getting a bit worse for wear as I'm getting older. I had to start wearing glasses a couple of years ago,
Yeah.
from all that sitting there looking at the footage. Because some of these things I'd capture, I'd film for 2 or 3 weeks, right? I'd be doing it at 25 frames a second or 50 frames a second, and I'd get something on one frame. One
Oh.
frame. I'm recording at 3,000 frames a minute. You get something on one frame, and
Oh
I'd
my
sit there
God.
for weeks, weeks. Some of those pictures in my book, they were just on one frame, and I had to look through perhaps 30 hours of footage. At 25 or 50 frames a second just to get those images.
Now, as we know,
It was hard work,
I,
really,
I,
really, really hard work.
no kidding. I think I'm not sure that I could persevere like that. Um, Now, we all know about Jose Escamilla, who brought up the idea of rods at first. He was getting these images of sort of these elongated things flying in the air, and then somebody came out and demonstrated that some of them were in fact insects or birds. I guess flying at a high speed or versus the shutter speed or whatever, they would
Yeah, yeah,
give that illusion of kind of an elongated streak. Uh, but
that's right. Yeah,
but I think
yeah.
Escamilla said that if you get up to a certain shutter speed, there's nothing that's supposed to be it's supposed to capture everything. So if you're still getting some kind of a in quotes streaking or something, you still must have some kind of unknown. But I was going through your literature and so forth, and you've captured some of those images that are just insects or birds or whatever that look distorted. What kind of a process do you go through to separate the known from what are probably unknowns?
Well, basically, I've made a video, which is on YouTube on the Quest for the Invisible's YouTube site. It's called Rod's Skyfish Fact or Fiction, and I've actually shown some footage on there. I've shown how this repeat thing happens. And I've shown how these sort of rod-like entities appear. And there's some stills, you can see all the multiple repeats. But I found that it only happens when these insects are within a couple of feet from the camera. You basically, they look really, really big, although they're very tiny, and you get multiple repeats depending on how fast they're turning. And I've done a video all about this, and then I've actually put some pictures of actual proper fish light forms that I've photographed, well, that I filmed in ultraviolet, which are definitely, not insects. But I basically film with multiple cameras. I use a camera filming the visible spectrum and also film in the infrared. So I look back through the footage. But I started catching a lot of insect things at first, and then I soon realized what they were. So I set about filming them on purpose, getting as many examples as I can. And I put together this film, Skyfish Fact or Fiction, just to show people how this thing happens with interlaced videos. Because of the speed, I've shown how this whole thing happens, where you get multiple repeats, and I've kind of explained that. But I just use a normal camera as well, recording in movie mode. I record the exact same scene, or I use a CCTV camera. And these things that I capture, they don't appear in the visible spectrum at all. So
you think that there's no doubt there's a clear distinction between something that is truly unknown and the illusion we get with some known things like insects and birds.
oh gosh, yeah, yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
all
The
right.
the rod thing is real. There are skyfish or rods, whatever you want to call them. There's been loads of people who've, recorded these huge, like missile-like skyfish, or rods, whatever you want to call them. They look like torpedoes or missiles. And I've actually captured a couple of them in the video that I'm talking about. The Skyfish Fact or Fiction. There's some of the footage that I've taken, some of the photographs actually showing these long torpedo-like things, and they're definitely not insects. There's some very strange things out there, but I believe that rods, stroke skyfish, are part of the invisible world. I believe.
So
That's what I'm starting to think. But they're
okay.
very real. But you just got to sort through the insect stuff, and a lot of people were taken with the stretched insects, thinking they were rods when they weren't. But I realised this pretty early on, you see. And I began capturing actual forms that looked like proper fish with proper fish fins on them. There's a few of those in my book, and there's a few on the website.
Do you think there's any chance that some government agencies, of course they wouldn't admit it, must be aware of some of this and perhaps are documenting some of it? Or do you think the entire establishment, seen or unseen, completely rejects all of this?
Officially, they do reject it, but I think there must be people studying it. But also, they get a bit itchy, itchy feet when they don't like people looking into this stuff too deeply. People get watched, people get followed, and they get the computers attacked. All sorts of stuff like that. You'd be surprised. I've had a couple of things happen myself, believe it or not. But
Yeah, well,
yeah,
well, definitely. We're going
uh,
to tease that for part two. So the people are probably mad at me, like, what are you doing? We want to know it now. But yes, and it just seems like that's a common thing where uh, the elites, or whoever that is, it seems like they want to keep that knowledge for themselves and don't want to share it with us, the great unwashed. And that seems to go across the board with all kinds of esoteric knowledge and UFOs, cryptids, and so forth. So it just doesn't seem logical that they could be completely unaware of this, and that there may be, you know, halls in the government somewhere uh, where people are actually documenting some of this stuff themselves and may even know much more about it, but they're just keeping their lips buttoned. Um, so just tell us a little more about the early days when you were first discovering this and developing your process. What was that like as time went on? Is there any other significant events that happened very early on in your research?
well, basically, I started. For a long time, I was capturing sort of little things high in the sky, nothing that I could really put in a book or anything. But I kept noticing I was catching these things that looked a bit like butterflies, but they were spinning instead of flapping. And it's what I've come to call the spinning jennies. And I filmed lots and lots of footage of these things, and I started really looking into what they were. And they seem to be like a flat fish, like with wings, stroke, fins. And they bend their body, nose down, and spin like a helicopter. And I filmed huge schools of these things swimming, flying together. And I've caught these other things which are called the plasmatic gliders, and they were about the first two things that I managed to film. And they were attracted to the cloudbuster. I only filmed them whenever I had the cloudbuster aiming above the huge trees at my research area. And I did different movements on the Cloudbuster, and it seemed to attract them. They're very strange looking things. I've got footage of these things actually flying on my YouTube, Quest for Invisible's YouTube channel. There's actual live video footage showing these things flying across the tops of the trees, and they spin round.
And these were
Very unusual.
invisible to the naked eye?
Very, yeah, totally invisible to the naked eye. Yeah, they appeared in the infrared. I've never caught them in the ultraviolet, but they're in the infrared. These plasmatic gliders, they're like a fluidic piece of paper that can change its form. It can form into like a paper aeroplane type shape, or it can spin, or it can basically just flow, or it can fold itself into 2 or 3 pieces. Very strange looking things, but I filmed quite a few of these. I've got some great footage of these things like flying in groups and flying together and doing all sorts of like somersaults and things like they're showing off for the camera. And that's on the YouTube, the Quest Invisible's YouTube site.
Um,
Um,
oh, go ahead.
so yeah, so I knew definitely that I should start filming lower at the sky. So I started filming much lower, just above the tops of the houses, rather than right up in the air. And I found that I was filming a lot more things, um, which is why, especially in the ultraviolet, I started filming using the sun obliteration technique in the ultraviolet, and I caught some great stuff. Some of my best footage is from the ultraviolet. And that makes up quite a lot of my book, Quest for the Invisibles. But I've got some fish-shaped forms, some of the forms that don't make any sense at all. Some of them are just like spinning energy. There seems to be a whole load of different things that are existing. It's just almost like there's loads of different levels going on at the same time.
Well, I guess maybe
Around
it,
us.
it would make sense if you've got sort of not strata exactly, but you go deeper and deeper into the ocean. I think there are certain creatures that would not be able to rise to the surface because of the pressure, lack of pressure. They might possibly explode. I wonder if that's the same thing. I don't. Maybe these things they don't even react to air pressure. It almost seems like some of them just sort of filter through it, like it's not even there. But with the way you describe
Mm.
these things, it almost sound, you can just imagine a myriad of all kinds of different, let's call them undocumented critters, flying throughout the atmosphere that virtually nobody knows about.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, yeah. Well, that's the thing. That I filmed so many different types, especially of fish-like forms, and I've caught the same ones over and over again, and they still keep the same shape. They still look similar. This is the thing. There's all sorts out there. I mean, obviously you've got entities as well. I mean, I've filmed quite a few entities, like well, ghostly type, paranormally type entities as well. I filmed some very strange things, even like invisible mists, glowing invisible mist. I filmed, which is on my website. And that was really strange. I was in the middle of this wooded area, and I suddenly got a hit on the Geiger counter. Took a photograph took a couple of photographs in total darkness. And in one photograph, there's a luminous mist which is lighting up everything, sort of right next to me, moving through the woods, and you can see it's like fluidic and dripping off the leaves
Aha,
of the
really?
trees.
But it's
Yeah,
not,
it's on the website.
but it's not
But it
visible
was
at
it,
all. It's
I saw nothing. It was even lighting up the leaves. The infrared light was reflecting off it, and of course I filmed stuff at my cat Roy's grave. I don't know if you've seen on the website. I filmed an entity coming straight out of the grave, a snake-like entity. Um, I filmed a whole load of strange stuff like that,
yeah.
ground level.
I heard you talk about that incident, which is really creepy, and I'm not sure. I'm not sure that I would connect it directly with the cat, although wouldn't know. Uh, but I don't know if you know who Rosemary Ellen Guiley is. Great researcher, written just dozens and dozens of books, and I know her through the Mothman Festival. Actually, that
Uh,
connection. Great
yeah.
lady, and when she's been a good friend. She was out west with Chris O'Brien. Chris O'Brien is the man that wrote. Books on the San Luis Valley, which is one of these high strangeness areas where all this stuff happens. Well, they were out one night and they were in an area where it looked like these snake-like, serpent-like things. They were ethereal. They could see through them. Were coming up
Mm,
out of the ground and going back in the ground and coming toward them. And
yeah.
they got a real negative vibe from them. And they got the heck out of there. So I wonder
Yeah.
if there's any connection at all to what you experienced.
Well, it could be, well be, but basically what happened was my cat. I had to get my little cat Roy put down. He was a wild cat that I'd taken on, and he wasn't very well. I had to get him put down in the end. And when I got him put down, I buried him. And I went out every night, and I sat there with the Geiger counter in my hand, and I basically set the camera up on a tripod, and I took 15-second exposures. I took about 1,000 over about sort of 2 months, and I only ever caught two images. Every other image was just pitch black. But I asked him if he could give me a sign. All the time I'd say, "Can you give me a sign that he's still around, Roy?" Um, and that was it. I put a model of Bast, the Egyptian cat goddess, on there, and I put flowers on there. And on one photograph, it looks like a plasma burst coming out, two plasma bursts, bright pink coming out from the gravesite, and one of them looks like it's recreated the flowers that I put on the grave. But no, that's when all the real full-on paranormal stuff started happening in my house. It went crazy for 2 years. Um, Very, very strange time that was, and I got some of the best footage I've ever got. But it was a very unsettling time, and I was sure that it perhaps wasn't my cat Roy. It was perhaps some other thing because I was in a bit of a state. I was very upset and very sort of low at the time, and I think that perhaps something was preying on my state of mind.
Well,
Perhaps,
understandably so. We've all experienced the loss of pets, and we've over the years we've lost three cats, and it's really pretty traumatic. Um,
yeah.
so the um, and you said you had a statue of the Egyptian god Anubis.
Yeah,
Okay.
No, Bast, the cat goddess.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Bastet or Bast or Bastet.
That's
Yeah,
interesting.
I had like a bronze model on the actual grave, and I said sort of, I buried him and said some prayers, and stuff like that. And then the next day, I think I picked some flowers and I put them on the grave earlier that day. And then I went out at night, took a load more photos, and on one of them, there's like these two plasma bursts which come out, and one of them seems to have formed into the shape of the flowers, which were long-stemmed daisy plants with multi heads on them. Seems to have kind of recreated that. So I thought, well, perhaps that is Roy, saying thanks, But the snake-like entity, it's got scales and a bill. There's a picture of that on my website. It's got eyes and it's almost like posing in front of the camera. The whole site is lit up, and it's almost coming straight out from the gravesite. That was a 15-second exposure. Um, Crazy
Wow.
photograph that is,
Yeah.
and everything else was just. I've got a photo prior to it as well, which shows what the scene should look like, and it's pitch dark.
Right.
Shouldn't see anything.
That's
Yeah,
crazy. Yeah, that's one hell of a pet cemetery.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
There's another. This is we're going to almost wrap up this hour in just a second, and I'll tease it in just a second as well. But there was I don't know if you know who Joshua Warren is. He's a well-known researcher into the paranormal. Some years ago, Joshua Warren, Nick Redfern, who's well known, both
Mm,
sides of the ocean, Jim Mars and Heidi Hollister, a whole bunch of people that were going to be included in a pilot for the Discovery Channel. And they went to Roswell and they did something kind of silly that you do for TV. And there were rumors of seeing ghosts of alien grays in this particular facility. So what they did was they had I would call it kind of a mock seance to contact the alien grays. So they go through
oh
this
God.
process. And now, Joshua Warren blew the whistle on this because he said that they weren't supposed to say anything. Now, this is years ago, but they captured some bizarre footage
Mm,
on high definition camera when they did this sort of silly mock seance. One of the guys passed out, and then on this high definition camera, they saw something like you're describing. Only I think maybe it was almost segmented like a centipede or something, translucent, and it was going through the air right over the seance area. And when they
yeah.
saw it, they had absolutely no explanation for it. And the whole thing is crazy, trying to contact the souls of, I think it's crazy anyway, contact the souls of alien greys. But
That's
just
ridiculous because I think they're quite. They do, I'm starting to think they perhaps might be quite demonic anyway. So
Well, they might be, and I'm not sure anything actually crashed at Roswell, but that's another story. Uh,
yeah.
but anyway, the point is that there are these, and when you talk about creature reports, there are some that are kind of similar with Bigfoot and so forth. Every once in a while, you'll get some kind of a anomaly within an anomaly, things that just don't make any sense. And the what you experienced there at your cat's grave was pretty bizarre. Why don't we, for right now, I want to tease the next part two when we reconvene with Nick Hayden, who wrote Quest for the Invisibles.
Hayes.
Oh, I'm sorry,
Hayes.
Hayes. My, okay. I was there's actually a music guy. I keep wanting to call you his name. He does ambient music. So at least I was close that time. But anyway, when we pick up in part two, we're going to get much more into your research because there's a lot more to talk about. But also, we want to talk about, I don't want to get too dramatic here, but there was kind of I guess you could say, a negative or dark side that you experienced. And
Very
maybe
much,
from
very
the
much.
paranormal aspect and also. Uh, Maybe some kind of government scrutiny, perhaps even. So anyway, we will get into that.
Yeah.
But right now, tell us about your website and where to get hold of you and everything. And before we close out.
Yeah, the website is www.questfortheinvisibles, all one word, .co.uk. So that's questfortheinvisibles.co.uk. And I've also got a Quest for the Invisibles YouTube channel, which is just QFTI, obviously Quest for the Invisibles. But if you just Google Nick Hayes Quest for the Invisibles, you'll see it all come up. You'll see the website and the YouTube site come up. But on the YouTube site, you can see some little videos I've made. One of them's about photographing, well, it's about skyfish, and it goes into the rod thing and the fact that, some of these insects get elongated. There's also other videos showing fish-like forms that I've captured, the spinning jennies that I was talking about earlier, plasmatic gliders, and all sorts of other strange things. And there's loads of photographs on the website. There's an evidence section of entities, um, skyfish, infrared UFOs, the whole lot. So plenty of photographs for people to look at on there if they're interested.
And of course, your book Quest for the Invisibles is available on Amazon and everywhere.
It's available everywhere, basically. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, listen, Nick Hayes, I want to thank you for being here in part 1, and looking forward to part 2. And I'm going to do my sit tight. I'm going to do my closeout, and we'll get back to you. Okay. So here we go. You know what? I didn't do my station identification. Oh, well, I guess, this is, people have to know that this is copyrighted by the Paranormal UK Radio Network. The conversation was too engrossing, so I'm going to blame Nick on that. And I also need to thank Irene Allen Block and Nort Johnson, who are our fearless leaders here on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. Andy Mercer, my part-time co-host and my full-time producer, who makes the show sound as good as it possibly can. Brian Zeller did the music. And also, you can be hearing me on Mac Maloney's Military X-Files on the same network as a correspondent every week. And I am Steve Ward, your humble host here on the High Strangeness Factor, a displaced Yank here on Paranormal UK Radio. Thank you for listening. I will see you all again in a fortnight. Take care. Welcome to this edition of the High Strangeness Factor on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. I'm your host, Steve Ward. On each episode of the High Strangeness Factor, while we explore all aspects of the paranormal and the unexplained, we put a special emphasis on the parallels and underlying patterns that seem to lie beneath the surface of all of these strange mysteries. This is part 2 of our interview with Nick Hayes. And Nick Hayes is a UK-based author and researcher. He spent almost 10 years photographing and filming in the infrared and ultraviolet parts of the electromagnetic spectrum, documenting the strange invisible life forms, craft-like objects, and other phenomena that appear to be existing just beyond the range of normal human sight. Influenced by both the earlier photographic work of Trevor James Constable and Italian UFO research group, the GRCU, Hayes uses a whole range of attraction and detection methods, including a cloudbuster and a Geiger counter. In September 2016, his first book, Quest for the Invisibles, was published by the Book Tree in San Diego. The book covers the first 5 years of his work and features dozens of photographs and video stills of biological UFOs and other phenomena captured at his research area near Oxford. In 2017, he launched the Quest for the Invisibles website as a platform to present new evidence, and video footage can also be seen. The Quest for the Quest for the Invisibles QFTI YouTube site. Hayes continues with his photographic work and has recently co-written a two-part paper entitled Positive Findings on Constable's Organotic. I think I mispronounced that again.
Organotic
Organotic, boy, that's a tough one.
bioforms.
I guess I need that little
It's a
thing up there
mouthful.
to tell me where the emphasis is.
Yeah. It's
Bioforms.
positive findings on constables. Yeah, positive findings on constables' organotic bioforms.
There, I'm glad you. I'll just have you say it the next time. Uh, that brings
It's a bit of a
together
mouthful.
that brings together photographic evidence from many different sources in support of Constable's original work in the 1950s. This is part two, as I said, of an interview with Nick Hayes, and we this is one of the areas that I've always found fascinating. Trevor James Constable and his work with infrared photography, catching in the sky basically invisible critters, as he would put them. And I encourage everybody to go to check the podcast and go back to part one because you're missing a lot if you don't listen to that. But Nick is just kind of a very basic recap. We talked about Trevor Constable in the early years when he was out in the Mojave Desert, taking these really bizarre photographs, and how I didn't know what to make of them at first until I heard Constable interviewed years later and found out he was a very credible guy. He wrote a follow-up book, a more complete book, years later called The Cosmic Pulse of Life, which we've talked about. He was connected in one way or another with people like Wilhelm Reich, Dr. Ruth Drown, Rudolf Steiner, and the list goes on. We may touch on that again some more. Is there anything else we should tell the listeners about what we covered? We covered the first part of your research. How you had a classic, a very strange UFO sighting that was more like a creature than anything nuts and bolts or mechanical, and which was very unusual, by the way. And you got a hold. You were inspired by both of Constable's books, and and you took it from there. You figured out how to reproduce his research, and you started filming and taking pictures with what the infrared and ultraviolet techniques.
Yeah, well, yeah. Well, basically, I bought a digital camera and I sent it off to a company called MaxMax in USA. And what they did, they basically in digital cameras and digital camcorders, they've got like a blocking filter, often referred to as a hot mirror, and it basically blocks invisible light. So, in the case of the infrared camera, they took this blocking filter out and they replaced it with an infrared pass filter. So basically, the camera only sees, it doesn't see visible light or ultraviolet. It just goes straight in at 720 nanometers, or if I use a 780 filter, it goes right into the infrared. So that's what I use to do a lot of it. I use movie mode as well on the camera, but I've also got a full spectrum camcorder, which has been converted so that it sees ultraviolet, visible light spectrum, and infrared. And you basically have to use different filters to block out or pass the desired part of the spectrum. So I often film in the ultraviolet with that. So the infrared and the visible light are blocked out.
Uh,
So a lot of my footage I've got in the ultraviolet, a lot of the good footage.
And we already covered a lot of your early experiences capturing all kinds of different creatures, things in the air that are visible to the naked eye. And we talked about how you differentiated between sometimes known birds or insects will create an illusion, kind of a streaking effect when you take the photograph. And some of those resemble a bit some of the what appear to be unknown creatures. And you developed a
Well, that's
technique.
right. Yeah.
Yes, but you
Yeah,
developed a
that's
technique. Go
because of
ahead.
the interlaced video. Yeah, well, especially happens because of the interlaced video recording. If something's moving fast, you kind of get one of the frames slightly faster, and what you get is a repeat. You get like the insect's body stretches into a long rod, and you get multiple repeats of the wings. And that's the effect. And I've actually, on the video that I talked about earlier, Skyfish Fact or Fiction, you can actually see some live footage, which I've slowed right down. You can actually see this effect happening as the mosquitoes fly about a foot away from the camera. I've got them so they're reflecting sun and slowed it right down. You can actually see this effect. And I've explained how this happens. But yeah. Well, basically, I mean, a lot of the things I capture, they don't look anything like birds or insects anyway. But plus, a lot of them get, most of them give off Geiger
Right.
counter hit.
Has
Plus, the fact is, I film in the visible spectrum as well, so that I can see what's happening in the visible spectrum and what's in the infrared or ultraviolet.
right, because if it's an insect or a bird, you're gonna pick up something, even if it's a small little dot in the visible light.
Oh yes.
Now, what about you?
Well, that's the thing. Yeah.
You have a couple of dogs, and have your dogs ever been with you when you've done some filming, and have they ever reacted to anything out there that you took a picture of?
Oh gosh, yes, yeah, definitely. Well, after my cat Roy died, and I had the weird stuff going on near the grave, I noticed that the Geiger counter, I'd get a Geiger counter hit, saying that radiation levels had gone up, past the threshold which I set, which is zero point 0.20 microsieverts per hour. And what happened was the dogs started reacting, and they kept staring at my greenhouse. So I started taking photographs of the greenhouse, and I caught four entities in the greenhouse windows, and the dogs reacted to them. And it was after these entities, the photographs that I'm talking about now can be seen on the website, the Quest for Invisible's website, and they're in the evidence section. Now, the first entity I caught looked like some kind of, it looked like someone from the 18th century, a really weird looking, like a night watchman, and he just appeared reflected in the window. And the next one was looking like an ET, and the next one looked like it got horns, and it looked like it got a creature on its lap with horns. And then the fourth one was this real hideous looking thing. And then I started getting stuff going on in the room upstairs where one of my dogs was sleeping with me, and the other dog would refuse to go in my room. But it disturbed my dogs really badly that my dog Lucy has only just within the last month started to go upstairs by herself in my room. But they were looking around the room at things, and one of the dogs, Selfie, was snarling. And I got this real horrible feeling of dread. And this went on for nearly 2 years. I started, and I took loads and loads of photographs during this time, and I caught all sorts of light trails and various entities, which I've put onto the website. But the dogs would see them. And the funny thing is, the dogs would suddenly stop and look, and then the Geiger counter would go off.
Oh,
And then I'd get that feeling of dread. But of course, but yeah, I mean, I don't normally get that feeling. It was just during this 2 year period. It was almost like fear, and things were happening in the room. The dogs would start barking, and I'd wake up, and I could hear my voice being called, and things were being moved, and it started affecting my sister because I live with my sister. I live in a flat alongside my sister's house. We're sort of connected by the roof, but it was stuff was happening to my sister. She was hearing footsteps and tapping, and hearing a voice called, and the doorbell kept ringing in the early hours of the morning. And we've got like a gated place where we live. You can't even get in. And the doorbell kept ringing, and strange things happened. A photograph of my dad that I'd never seen before, or my sister had never seen before, actually appeared in my sister's room. A decent photograph of my dad. I'd never seen a photograph of my dad when he was young.
so
Um,
this stuff
when he was young,
started,
and it just appeared. Yeah, it started after Roy died. And I
and
think I opened
after
myself up to it, and more stuff was showing up.
and after you started to delve into this sort of thing, you had all these other things start to happen. When you described that feeling of dread,
Yeah.
what was that as a result of
Oh,
the dogs reacting, or was that something more like you're sensing something that wasn't right?
I was sensing something that wasn't
Okay.
right,
Well, so
combined with the dog's reaction as well. Because the more the dogs were freaking out, the more it made me, freak out, because I could see that they were watching things walking around the room, and one of them was like whimpering, lying on the floor. Um, the other one would just look the other way, as if he didn't want to see. And I kept turning him around, saying, "What's there? What's there?" And they didn't want to know. They got very, very scared, and it affected my dog Lucy really badly, really badly.
so you really had it was like three confirmations. You had kind of a sixth sense where you knew something wasn't right. The Geiger counter went off, and the dogs were reacting to something
Yeah,
unseen. So that's
yeah.
confirmation of something, we don't know what exactly, obviously, but something paranormal, something anomalous occurring there that's real. So,
Well, this is the thing. The thing is, when you open yourself up, see, from the word go, I've always looked up to the skies and sort of said in my mind, if there's any invisibles up there, will you show yourself for me? Of course, I was doing this for years and years, not knowing that I was actually summoning and asking things into my presence. And I had no problems for many, many years, until Roy died. And all of a sudden, it's almost like everything was coming in. I've got some great photographs, and I look at them now, and I was thinking, oh, that's great. But at the time, I couldn't even bear to look at half the photos, because I just didn't want to kind of believe what sort of stuff that I'd filmed.
uh,
It's freaky, really, really scary at times. you
Well,
know,
there is.
it's not good when you've got stuff going on like that, you know.
No, I don't think
Um,
I'm not sure. See, I'm the kind of guy that I have I've had maybe one really weird experience, but for the most part, I've even been in the I don't know if you're familiar with the TNT area, north of Point Pleasant, West Virginia, where they saw the Mothman for the first time. I've been out there several times with
mm.
people that have experienced things, and they're out there seeing and experiencing things, and for the most part, nothing is happening to me. I suspect that if I was out there with you filming and
By
so forth.
yourself.
Well, if I
Yeah,
was even if I was with you, I may be the guy that said, "Nick, you're crazy. Nothing's happening here. There's nothing going on."
yeah.
But uh, but it's interesting because Trevor. Oh, by the way, Trevor James Constable, when he wrote his first book, he called himself Trevor James, and it was just
Mm.
I want people to know that because he was a businessman. He was also an actor. I can't remember the name of the film. He was actually in a film with Richard Burton playing a small part.
Oh, was he?
It was a war movie. I've even got it. I can't remember the name of it, but he was he of course he was a native New Zealander originally, but he was in there.
That's right. Yeah,
He
yeah.
was he was playing an Australian in this film. So I don't know
Oh
if that was
no.
a huge stretch or not, but yeah, he didn't. Unfortunately, he didn't have much of a part. But that was and even when he spoke at Giant Rock, and there's a great book which chronicles some of that. I've been a huge fan of Gray Barker, who's he was a kind of a trickster and would color up stories and everything. He was the publisher of Saucerian Publications in Clarksburg, West Virginia. I even got a chance to meet him briefly at a MUFON symposium, but
Wow.
that's another story. But he wrote a book called Gray Barker at Giant Rock, and it's about him and Jim Moseley, the editor of Saucer News, another old-time saucer guy. Both have left us by now, but he and Jim Moseley drive out to Giant Rock in 1970, the last Giant Rock convention, and in the introduction, Moseley says that Barker takes some license because he talks about some of the people he talks about in the book weren't actually there at the 1970 convention. They were there much earlier, and one of them was Trevor James Constable, and there
Right.
he was known as Trevor James also. And
Yeah.
it talks about his first meeting with him, so that had to be long before 1970. And but anyway, like I said last episode, Constable was not well received because
No, definitely not.
he talked about this dark side that you're talking about, and this was the Giant Rock Convention, boy, where the where George Van Tassel would gather together all of the contactees and all the true believers and
Mm.
long-haired Venusians and peace, love, and brotherhood, and they did not want to hear Trevor James or Trevor James Constable's message, but it's a really very entertaining book. All of Barker's stuff is, but I want to also mention. There's a book by Brad Steiger that mentions Constable. It's called
Yeah.
well, there's two of them. There's this one's the UFO abductors, and he gets into the Constable had a belief in the there's the Persian and Chaldean tradition of
Mm.
the something called the Aramanes, who are fallen angels and expelled from
Yeah.
heaven.
Oh,
Yes,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
do you
yeah,
know about
yeah,
that?
yeah,
Well,
yeah, yeah.
Constable thought that there were these dark forces out there battling the good forces and the dark forces that he believed, and he even seemed to give some credibility to a guy that wrote the Atlantis in the Latter Days. He talks about that in this great correspondence between him and Gray Barker. Anyway, I won't belabor this, but ladies and gentlemen, if you got to get Nick's book for one thing, Quest for the Invisibles, uh, and you have got this is such a fascinating area of research. It doesn't end, and I've got all these notes in front of me that I'll never get to, but anyway,
Yeah.
keep going with what you're talking about in this particular phase of your
Yeah.
research. Things start to get a
Okay.
little
So,
bit dark.
yeah. So basically, from 2010 to 2015, I was recording mainly sort of in the infrared and ultraviolet in the daytime, and I wasn't really sure how to start filming at night. But having looked at the GRCU, the Italian research group, the fact that they used different instruments such as precision magnetic compasses, temperature indicators, frequency measurements, ultraviolet detectors, and ultrasound. They used and Geiger counters, and I thought, oh wow, I think I'll get a Geiger counter. So I started just going out with a Geiger counter at night, and I was getting hits now and then. I took photographs, but nothing happened. But it's then that every time I walked past Roy's grave, I got a hit, and every time I walked past the greenhouse. So of course I kept going out every night, every night, every night, taking hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of photographs. So I only ever ended up with 4 of these entity photographs. But I had a strange thing happened in the room. It was almost like an entity was trying to form in my room, and I grabbed my camera and tried to take a photo, and the camera just packed up and never worked again. And that was a really expensive camera, and that was it. Never got a photograph of anything. The camera just stopped
Huh.
and never worked again. And it was really annoying because it cost me a lot of money because I had to send the camera off to America to get it converted. You see, because there wasn't a firm that I knew of in the UK doing it at that time. It was a very weird time. So I got another camera. My sister helped me to get another camera, but everything kind of went dark. These entities that were popping up and strange things happening. It was really weird, but I couldn't help going out there and filming, and it unbalanced me quite a lot, I must admit. I was hearing my name called just as I was about to go to sleep, and I'd wake up and I'd think I'd hear someone walking around the room, and one of my dogs, I'd put the light on, and my dog would be stood up and shaking. It was a horrible time, and I say it affected my sister. So I just carried on filming and filming at night, and during this period, I filmed some strange stuff in the sky. Some of that's on the website. I filmed sort of like a load of lights that seemed to be linked to some sort of solid object, although it was in the infrared, and it was directly above some trees in my garden, and it looked quite big. And that picture is actually on the front page of my website. It's a line of lights that are going across. But I started getting a lot of strange things. Getting a bit worried at the time because when you're doing this all the time, it becomes very, very obsessive. And when it's the only thing you're really pushing in your life, as you discover things, your whole life changes. And I felt that I was perhaps attracting things to me all the time, and I didn't realize that before. It didn't occur to me. So somebody said to me, you want to watch what you're attracting into your life. And I thought, oh wow.
Have you ever thought
But I
about
feel okay. I feel all right now.
have you ever thought about some people that go into ghost investigations and that sort of thing, do some kind of meditation or protection prayer or whatever? Have you ever done or
Yeah,
thought
yeah.
about
No,
doing
I do
anything
use
like that? Okay.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the thing is, I never, until I recorded those entities in the greenhouse, I never recorded anything paranormal. I was just filming in the sky, so I wasn't quite prepared for it. But yeah, I do protect myself. Yeah, you have to. I think you have to. You have to protect yourself. With light and whatever. People have different belief systems, but I do protect myself now against negative things because I didn't realize it all comes back to this, positive and negative thing again. I started to realize the more research I do that there are positive things out there and and unpositive things or darker things, as you say, and you can get sort of like dragged into it all. And that's the main reason I've always kept away from paranormal stuff. I've kept away from Ouija boards. I've kept away from a lot of that stuff, and especially with channeling, because I knew a lot of people that were saying they were channeling this, that, and everything else, and a few of them have really gone insane and have never seen them again. And you just don't know, what you're channeling. This is the thing, and especially after Trevor James Constable adventures, that he had that he talks about in They Live in the Sky, where he lost control of his actual body, and he was
Right.
getting conflicting reports coming in. So I agree exactly with what and reading that bit which Trevor wrote sort of gave me a bit of forewarning, really, of what could happen.
He was
And then I
getting some
finally realised that was happening. Yeah.
he was getting some crazy, like we mentioned a little bit last time, he was getting some crazy messages that had to be nonsense, but at the time he didn't know. It was too new.
Mm,
And for those that don't know, when he wrote his second book, The Cosmic Pulse of Life, he reflects on those times, and he you can see that he's a little older and wiser about what he was letting in, and he really questioned a lot of those early messages. Now you mentioned the obsession thing. Uh,
mm,
I kind of consider myself obsessed, but I don't think I've had, well, but I go way back. I had a roommate where we had some odd things happen, but John Keel, again, he warned people about getting too obsessed because
mm.
he warned that belief was the enemy. The phenomena seemed to adjust itself to fulfill a particular theory he had at the time, and
Yeah.
he admits in several interviews, he said he was paranoid. There's even a chapter of the Mothman Prophecies that says paranoiacs are made, not born, and he was just knee
Yeah.
deep into it, and there's a lot of literature that people can find on Keel now to find out the weird things that were happening to him. So I can I do have at least an idea, although I haven't really experienced anything like that myself, Nick. I at least have some idea of what you had gone through, what you were going through.
Yeah, well, if people look at the website and see in the evidence section the entities, especially, they'll see the entities that I'm talking about that came, and some of them don't look that nice. And people say, you can look at it and think that's a great photo, but people don't realise what goes with it. It's not just a photo; it's often things that go with it, and the feeling that you've got with it that you can't shake off. And you can turn very paranoid because it's your whole reality. You need to get grounded sometimes, and that's something I didn't do for many years. But it's something I do now. I decided to have a break from it. I appeared on the Paranormal UK Radio. I did 2 shows actually last year. I decided to have a rest from all this for a while, and then I did the shows on Paranormal UK Radio, and then I thought, right, that's it. And then Dave Schrader wanted me on his show, so I did a Dave Schrader show on Midnight in the Desert. So I spent quite a lot of time just talking about things, and I didn't do a lot of filming. Then I resumed my filming again in sort of like around Christmas time, just gone. And then that's when I got some of my best footage ever, some
Wow.
giant amoeba-like things that are just like Trevor James Constables, totally invisible. And I called them in. I actually called them in, stood there and telepathically called them in, set up the actual tripod, and they appeared right in frame. And you can see some movement where it's almost like they've adjusted themselves and moved in. And the first amoeba was it was like amoeba-like thing, like the one that Trevor caught in 1957 when he was sitting down at
Yeah.
breakfast at the campsite. Well, he caught that he caught 6 different frames, didn't he? 6 successive frames
Right.
of this huge thing. Well, I caught one exactly the same as Trevor, and this is like 50 odd years later, just over
That's
50 years later,
that's
and that's in the
phenomenal.
paper. Yeah, and then a week later, I figured that this thing must be coming through a portal. Because it was exactly where I've been aiming the Cloudbuster for a while. I gathered there must be a portal or something perhaps there. So I set up my camera a week later, as in total darkness, and I started taking like 20-second exposures and then 10-second ones. I did a whole, say, like 10 20-second exposures and 10-10-second. And in 2 of the photographs, there's a huge amoeba which is blue, and you shouldn't see blue in the infrared because the blue is basically blocked. And it was very, very faint, but it looks like a spaceship, but you can actually see the vacuoles on it and the markings, that you get on sort of like something in the microscopical world. And the thing is, the second photograph I took of the same thing, same amoeba-like form, it actually changed its shape. It had grown much bigger, and it fitted exactly in the frame. But it's almost like it knew, and it showed itself because the paper was just about to be published, and I hadn't caught anything like an amoeba. And I was thinking that would be a nice topping on the, for the paper. And then within 2 weeks of thinking that, I had a picture just like Trevor James Constable's, and then 2 extra bonus ones that show sort of like a blue illumination, which shouldn't even appear in the infrared because the the colours, the color blues blocks. It's right down there with the ultraviolet, but it seemed to illuminate itself, and it's almost like it's burnt itself onto the camera. It's very, very strange, but so that topped off the paper for me, which was obviously trying to bring as much evidence to support Constable's original claims. And what better than actually capturing an amoeba, sort of just right above, well, it was above a 35-foot tree, and I zoomed in slightly. I didn't see it at the time. I just felt this overwhelming urge that I was being watched, and I went out with my camera and just started taking random photos. And I caught 6 frames of it, but in 5 frames you could just see the edge of it. But I caught a really clear shot of just one. Well, I think it's half of its size. It's absolutely huge. It looks just like the one Trevor caught in 1957.
That's uh,
Um,
that's astounding.
yeah, no,
uh,
it was full on. It was my best capture yet. And then obviously the 2 amoeba, well, the same amoeba that I caught um, in the 2 different frames. But I've also went on to capture some more. Some of them even bigger. I went through 2 weeks of going out almost every night. I've got probably about half a dozen more photographs showing huge amoeba-like bioforms that have come right in, above my research area. It's amazing stuff. Amazing stuff.
uh, yeah, that is phenomenal. And because as I said before, when I saw Constable's early photographs, I just had no clue as to as to what they were, if they were real or not. I even
Mm.
I was the kind of kid that was always faking UFO photographs, with whatever. And so I tried to fake a Trevor James Constable type photograph. And I shouldn't admit this, but I got some suds and I hung it in front of the camera to a degree to make it look like that was going to be my sky amoeba. Well, it didn't actually work very well. So fortunately, those are lost in oblivion somewhere. But but obviously these photographs you've taken, uh, this is not this is not something easily explainable. It's not a dust orb.
Oh,
This is
definitely not. No.
it's not this is not a film camera, so it's not going to be something on the emulsion. It's not a speck of dirt on the lens. It's not some kind of a temperature inversion in the air. It's something much different.
Oh, definitely. I mean, you can see the vacuoles on it and the other markings, which just look like, from an amoeba. And on the actual blue amoeba, the one that I call the blue amoeba, that I took a 20-second exposure and then a 10-second. On the second exposure, the thing's grown about a third bigger, but you can still see the vacuole markings the same. And when you put one picture over the top, they line up exactly. And that is on the paper. Those pictures that I've just talked about, the amoeba and the two blue amoebas, that's actually on the paper. I think, which is just part one's been published, but part two is going to be published soon. Um, so, and I'm probably going to put some of those on the website at some point as well,
Well,
or even make another YouTube video about it or something, perhaps.
well, that'll be good. Um, let's see. Boy, there's so much. So uh, but you continued doing the research before your long break. And was there anything else that manifested that you experienced on sort of the negative side? Well, before I ask that, you mentioned that you got kind of an image of what you called an alien. I'm curious as to what it did. It
Yeah,
look
yeah.
like? Did it look like a gray, or did it just look like something
No,
very strange?
uh, out of this sort of grey alien head shape, but it didn't look grey. No, what I did I got the infrared camera and I used the actual flash. And what I did, I aimed the flash. What I noticed basically that when I kept getting these hits on the Geiger counter, I shone a torch into the greenhouse window, and what I noticed is that it reflected back and forward and like went into infinity. So I thought, wow. So basically, I decided to use a flash. So what I did, as soon as I got a Geiger counter hit, I just took a picture. And this is why some of them are a bit crooked, because I was in pitch darkness, couldn't see nothing. So the flash went off, and the actual flash was quite bright. It lit the greenhouse up, but I saw nothing. And the infrared camera only saw a small part of well, it's visible light, but the infrared camera just saw a small part of the red. I think the barely visible red, and that was enough to light these things up. So I used the camera flash to actually light these things up and make them visible in the infrared. But this alien, you can see this little alien. It looks very much like it's a bit like a grey, but it's kind of got more of a humany looking face on it. But it's definitely got a long neck and got a bulbous sort of head. And those photos can be seen, I say, on the Question Visible's website. But it looks very much like a sort of alien to me. But
Well,
looks like it's got a shirt on, a t-shirt, and you can see its neck, a spindly neck, and a big
uh,
bulbous head. And it's sort of turned around. You can see big bulging eyes on it, and you can actually see a mouth bit. Um, and yeah, yeah, it's a very strange looking thing,
well,
and that's the only entity that looks like that I've ever caught.
there are some strange crossovers in this entire realm. That's one of my things I look for, are patterns and parallels in the paranormal. I mentioned Rosemary Ellen Guiley before. She told me that she went to Waverly Hills Sanatorium in Louisville, Kentucky one time. And what you do is
Mm,
you
mm,
go there and you wait in the dark. And she's with a
yeah.
friend, and she said, "Do you see what I see?" And what they saw, it looked like an alien gray standing there in the shadows in an old ancient sanatorium that's supposed to be just haunted by ghosts. What the hell is a gray doing in a haunted building like that? But these kind of things show up often, where there's some kind of a weird connection for whatever reason that starts to pull this stuff more and more together. Do you have, when you've done a lot of this photography, do you have any theories, any speculation as to what are these things, and is there more than one explanation for what these things are or where they come from?
Do you mean the sky,
Yes.
the biological sky? I
Yeah.
just think that I just think that each planet. I'm starting to think that each planet's perhaps got lots of different levels around it, different sort of vibrationary rates. And I think consciousness is in a different form. I think there's various levels existing at the same time. Perhaps at higher frequencies. and I think they're all living simultaneously. Um, but when you come back, I mean, of course, I think I've got to the conclusion that a lot of the craft that people see aren't actually craft; they're actually these sky beings. Some of them are like creatures, like the amoeba. I mean, as you know, if sometimes they do come into the visible, as has been mentioned in Trevor James Constable's book, and they glow, at night they glow, and sometimes they can be disc shaped, they can be sort of like like torpedo shape. They can take any shape, and some of them seem to be able to take any shape they want. But I've seen some of this summoning people are doing, and there's some very strange things that change form. And I've caught a craft-like thing, which I'm convinced is an actual entity, but they appear to be made of like plasma. It's kind of like they've got their form in sort of the form in heat substance, the fourth state of matter, which is why they register in the infrared. But they seem to be able to take any form they can. I think that's true of the entities. I mean, the funny thing was that the first picture I caught in the greenhouse looked like this ghostly guy. And what happened was perhaps about a week later, I walked past the greenhouse. Geiger counter went off again, and in my mind, I said, "Oh God, I'm not really into this ghostly thing because this is the first sort of ghostly thing I'd ever caught." I said, "I'm more into filming ETs." And then, lo and behold, when I checked the photograph, it looked like an ET.
Huh.
And that's that same being also looked very similar to the other being that I'd caught before it that looked like a sort of a Victorian type thing. The face looked quite similar. So I started to wonder whether it was just an entity taking any form it wanted. It's almost like it was trying to please me when I made the comment that I'm not really into ghost hunting. More into filming
Yes.
ETs. And then an ET like thing showed up. Um, but the next one was hideous. It was this like being. I mean, I'm only saying hideous because it was a very dark face, and you could see its eyes, and it looked like it had horns. And behind it was two snarling skulls, and you could see the teeth in them. And this being that seemed to have horns, it held like a cat-like creature in its arms, and that had horns or ears. And they're looking back out at me from the greenhouse. And that was the third photograph I took, and that was a bit scary because I didn't. It was almost like a scene into hell. These two snarling skulls with big eyes. They almost look like Tyrannosaurus skulls with big black eyes and then white. And they were snarling over the back of this entity, which looked like it got horns. It was very, very weird, and it looked like a cat. And obviously that's around the time when my cat died. So I started thinking all sorts of things. It took me a while to actually kind of level out and try and work out, what's happening. But I think there's energy forms that can take any form they want. Um, and this is the thing. It's no like black and white thing you can put it down to. Things just are. They seem to be able to take whatever form they want. And especially some of these sky creatures, they seem to be able to change. I photographed a craft-like object that changed in every photograph I took of it. It looked different in all three. Um,
Well,
you
Constable
know,
did talk about ether ships, and he believed that some of these were,
yeah,
I guess, you could say aliens or extra dimensionals coming from elsewhere, and,
etherical.
and
Yeah,
they would
that's
have beings that could change shape or whatever on them,
where
based
the
on his
actual.
research.
Yeah, all the craft was the actual entity. I'm very
Yes.
much of that opinion. Yeah, I believe they're interdimensional. I don't believe that these things are coming from space.
Well, Dave
I don't.
Schrader talks about he went out to the Gilliland Ranch many years ago, which is another hot
Mm,
spot in Washington State. I forget the name of the mountain out there, the lake. Trout Lake with Washington. And,
right.
they have a lot of activity out there. Well, he said he saw something one night that looked like a creature. It looked sort of like a manta ray scooting through the sky, and it was kind of bluish, and he couldn't believe his eyes. So,
Mm,
occasionally this happens. And there was another great, I won't dwell on it, but Constable mentions another strange sort of creature sighting in 1925. It was a letter that was sent to Ray Palmer's Flying Saucers magazine, and these guys had landed in some of these old Jennies, these
Oh, that's
biplane
right. Yeah,
planes.
yeah. On
Remember
top of
that?
the messes. Yeah, that's right.
Exactly.
Yeah, X5. Yeah, yeah. And they saw that creature coming in to land, didn't they? And it had a bite out the side of it, and it was exuding like a metallic froth, wasn't it? And then
Yeah.
another creature came in and went over the top, and then some suckers like came out, and then it went glowed as bright as the sun, and off it went. Yeah,
Right.
very. Yeah, yeah. That's I know. It's great. When I read that, I thought, right on. That was. I mean, that was in the Cosmic Pulse of Life. Trevor talked about
Right.
that, didn't he? In his
I,
critters section. But yeah, no, I quite believe. When I saw that, I was like, wow. That
I
doesn't surprise me at all.
I went
Doesn't
and tracked
surprise me
down
at
the
all.
original. I've got the original magazine, so I could read the whole letter, which is
Wow.
pretty interesting. Hard to find those things sometimes, but
Oh
Ray
yes, yeah.
Palmer was, boy, an interesting character. He was knee deep in a lot of this stuff. But let me pause for just a moment. I want to remind everybody that you are listening to the High Strangeness Factor, copyrighted on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. I am your host, Steve Ward, and with me today is Nick Hayes, and this is part two of an interview which deals with his book, uh, Quest for the Invisible, and in following in the amazing footsteps of Trevor James Constable. Um, well, let's see. Is there any place? Well, I want to know more about the paranormal stuff that happened, and even maybe some governmental interference that went on. But you can take this
Yeah,
wherever
yeah,
wherever you
yeah,
want to go, Nick. Go ahead.
yeah. Well, basically, as I said, I had to send my camera off. I sent my camera off in 2010 to get it converted to infrared to a company in America, and a camcorder, and I had no problems. And then I think it must have been sort of after they'd passed some terrorist law or something. I don't know. They were looking at things coming into the country a bit more. The next time I sent my camcorder, um, I traced it through Kennedy Airport, and then after about a week or so, it was still in Kennedy Airport, um, taken off for inspection. It hadn't gone to the firm, to do the work on it. And then I noticed that I was being watched and followed, and helicopters were coming over. And I had like a couple of months of strange things like that. And they sit there in black cars. I saw a guy talking on a walkie-talkie, and as I went by, he said to the woman with him, he says, "That's the male we're interested in, like, about me." I thought, oh my
Right.
God, so it was very strange. I had a lot of strange stuff going on, getting like weird phone calls, and this was all
Really?
really happening at the same time as the paranormal stuff,
Well,
so
well,
it was
just a
really
second.
full on.
What kind of phone calls were you getting?
Just phone ringing and no one being on
Oh,
the other end, or just some
uh,
strange noise, like, yeah, no, that's very strange things coming. And but I was followed for quite a while. They were following me everywhere I went, but I realised they were following me. But I've also
and,
had a problem. I had a helicopter sent over really low. It came right down like it was going to land on the house. When I was out there with the cloudbuster.
oh,
I was
good
I was
Lord.
talking on the phone to a friend. I had a load of clicking on the phone because me and my friend were talking about things to do with the cloudbuster and etheric energy. And next thing I know, this really great helicopter comes over and goes round and round, then lowers itself down like it was going to come and do a rescue from the garden. And all the neighbours were like looking and that. And my sister says, "Oh, do you think that's a training mission?" I says, "Yeah, yeah, yeah." I was
Yeah,
thinking, "Oh
let's hope
shit,"
so.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So a few things like that, and quite a few emails as well from people, like threatening type emails and things from nutcases. You
Right.
get them. Um,
Um,
so
but
I've
the
had a few things.
just I'm just curious the strange sounds you heard on the phone. Anything you could identify? Just like a I don't know a mechanical sound or just maybe a like an electronic sound or something.
Yeah, a few electronic sounds, and then
Okay.
one sounded like a scream.
Huh. Okay.
Um, but it's on my mobile, and I don't really use my mobile that much, and there's only a few friends that I've got that ring me, so I don't know what it was, but it was always like I'd pick the phone up sometimes, well, get on the phone, and I could hear like this. It was like an office sound, like my phone had gone through to somewhere or it's being listened to. And one of my friends has experienced the same sort of thing as well. But
Well,
that was just sort of through a certain period of time, and then I got my camcorder back, and everything's been sort of okay, pretty much. But I mean, the helicopter thing was probably about a year ago. That was the
so
last time.
so you wonder. I
But
mean, it could be a crazy coincidence, but if you came to somebody's attention and they want to mess with you. I mean, they
mm,
didn't come to your door and say, "Stop using that cloudbuster, Nick."
no, no, not
They
as
messed.
such. No.
If it was a real government entity, they mess with your phone and buzz you with a helicopter to scare the crap out of you. So. I don't get it, from any viewpoint, but this is kind of typical with what has happened to a lot of UFO type investigators. I even had some strange beeps on my phone once years ago when I was heavily immersed in this stuff, but it may have had just a mundane explanation. So, but so now I remember I heard you uh, on another show, and you said something about was there a time when you it sounded like you were being followed or somebody was paralleling your path?
Oh yeah, yeah. Oh yeah, 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 yeah. That was the Live Alley. Yeah, yeah. This was crazy.
And,
I've
and,
talked
and
about
again,
this on a
is this
few
in the
programs.
in the
Yeah.
midst of
Oh
your
gosh.
investigation?
No, 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 no. This was a bit earlier. No, this was
Oh, okay.
basically. This was about 19. I used to live in a place called Wood Farm, in Oxford, and to get down to Cowley, my friend's house where we used to have a jam with the band that I was in at the time. I could either get a bus, and I had to go. It took about three-quarters an hour on a bus. I had to go right out of the way to get on another bus and come back. But there was a shortcut that went through this nature reserve called the Live Alley, and it goes down sort of like a hill, and it goes into like it's got thick trees either side. I would walk down there a million times. Used to go down there with my girlfriend at night and spend quite a lot of time down there. Never got scared. Never thought it was even creepy. Now this night I decided to go down and get the bus. The bus went, so I had no option but to walk down Live Alley, and it's about a 20-minute walk, and then you're on the golf course and you go straight down to Cowley. But what happened was I was walking down this footpath, and all of a sudden I could hear this crunching keeping up with me to the left. And where it was really thick shrub, right, with loads of little rivers and bits going through it, like tributary thing. And it was really weird. No one could see or follow me as far as I knew. And what happened was I suddenly stopped, and this crunch stopped, but it took an extra crunch, like it was someone that didn't realize how quick I'd stopped, and my ears suddenly went really kind of extra sensitive. So what I did, I carried on walking at a sort of a faster pace, and I suddenly stopped again, and I heard this extra crunch as well. So what I did then, I basically decided to sort of like walk quite fast. I did this like hop, skip, and a jump, and then I stopped, and I heard two more crunches, and I heard a almost like a wolf man type snarl. And I'd never experienced nothing like that. I just had to fight or flight, and I ran. I ran non-stop back to my house. But that really scared the life out of me, and I kind of not forgotten all about it, but put it to the back of my mind. And then I did an interview with Ben Eminem Jones, and he said, "Oh, I was trying to describe how scared I was when I was getting the paranormal stuff going on in my room." I said, "Oh, I haven't been that scared since I had this weird encounter." And he said, "Oh, tell me about it." So I told him about it, and he did it on his show. Then somebody else got involved, Deborah Hatswell, who's into the cryptids and things. She said, "Oh, can we talk about it on my on one of her? Well, she's got like a website with and a YouTube site, so she did like a." Told the story basically, but that was really weird. And it was like there's something invisible, and it was definitely bipedal. You could tell by the way it walked, and it was like it got really annoyed that I knew that it was following me, because it kept doing an extra crunch every time, like it wasn't prepared for me to suddenly stop. And I kept catching it out every time by suddenly stopping, and it did this extra crunch or so. And then the third time, it's almost like it realised that I knew, and it sort of went, "Ah," and I just ran. I've never been down there again by myself. I went down with Ben a couple of times, and I'm due down there again soon to see if we can film anything. But Ben's quite a big bloke, so I'm not too
That's
scared. I can probably run faster than him. But no, it really freaked me out, and it was like I don't know. I mean, I've never. There's been a lot of reports of strange things in that area over the years and sort of nearby, but I don't know what it was. But it definitely wasn't an animal. It was like a humanoid thing following me. I could hear the crunch because of the particular way that the valley came up. You could hear like an echo sort of thing from it.
and this is
Um,
fairly close to where you live.
where I used to live, yeah, yeah,
Oh, yeah.
and that was about the only paranormal type thing that I've ever had. So that was ages ago. That was about 19, probably about 1994. So so that's it. I was pretty involved with life really for many years. I didn't really look into the paranormal, never had any experiences. I certainly never had any sort of ghostly experiences till the invisibles, and strange things started happening and the animals started reacting. It just got really full on, but it's okay now. I was convinced that entity was coming through a mirror because the dogs kept barking at this mirror, this big antique mirror that I paid quite a bit for. So I basically wrapped it up and put it in the garage, and I've never taken all the mirrors down. I also had loads of. I've been to Egypt. My sister lived in Egypt for a bit, and I've got loads of models of the Egyptian gods and loads of papyrus, and my whole room was like covered in them. And after this weird stuff started happening, I took everything out because I was convinced that it was in some way linked with all these ancient Egyptian things and
Well,
the gods.
it
You
may
know,
have been, and it may not. There may not have been any power in or of this itself. But again, I go back to John Keel. He talked a lot about belief and how belief can manifest some of these things. He
I
uh,
definitely,
he
definitely, I reckon that's yeah.
and what I wonder is he thought that now his thinking wasn't static, and he was always changing. But for a while, he thought the only maybe objective things about the experience were perhaps these strange lights. Uh, these strange meandering lights, and that perhaps people were being programmed somehow. He even talked about transmogrification of energy, where he said he wasn't so concerned about what people were seeing, whether it was a UFO or a creature or whatever. He thought there was a, as he put it, a cosmic mechanism behind this, and that's what he wanted
Mhm.
and he thought that sometimes people were getting too wrapped up in the facade, so to speak. I mean, there was something
Oh,
really going on.
yeah,
You
yeah,
you feel
yeah.
the same
I
thing?
suspected. Yeah, yeah. I suspect. They're pretending to be spacemen, pretending to be craft, pretending to be aliens.
Yes.
That's what I think. A lot of them. That's the sort of lines I'm thinking along. And of course, you go back into the stuff, back to the Watchers and stuff. These beings that came down who were essentially in there. You've got all the same stories in South America. You've got like the Inca. And all these well, even going back to the Native Americans, they all talk about these gods coming down and teaching them this and that. And these gods are basically reptilian in their form, in their basic form. A lot of them wore masks, or they didn't show themselves in the reptilian form, so they wouldn't scare people.
Right.
Um, and I believe this has got a lot to do with what's going on. I believe it's very interesting, especially the Book of Enoch.
Oh,
Discovered that a few years ago, and that's I started piecing things together, and I thought, wow, all these different continents where they seem to have pyramids and these, massive technology, and it all seems to have been. I mean, I was listening to a guy, was it Michael Cremo?
oh yeah.
Um, and he was saying, he thinks that a lot of these cities were destroyed in a flood, sort of like 12,000 years ago, and basically it's almost like the gods were kicked off the earth, so to speak, and we sort of went back to sort of living, back on the land and everything. But I believe it's what's going on at the moment has got something very much to do with the stuff that's gone on in the past. Um, you know, there's just too
Yes.
many things that seem to sort of add up, and especially when you had the Mayan prophecy. A lot of people thought the world was going to end, but I reckon it was the opening of the doorways for these ancient gods to come back and things like that. I'm starting to look at it a bit more like that. Because I used to think that everything was a craft, but until I discovered Trevor Jones Constable, I never even considered that A, UFOs could be invisible, and B, that they could be anything other than craft. The fact that when I found out the biological craft, when he talked about biological UFOs, and I thought, wow, that's just like that thing that I saw, and that really made it really helped me to understand what I'd seen, and it was like an epiphany, to be quite honest with you. So I wrote off to Trevor, and then obviously I got straight on with it. I had this like necessity to do it, to film my own stuff, and to get further understanding. And that's sort of what's driven me, really, just trying to push onwards and prove that Trevor was right, and also present the GRCU work to people that wouldn't normally see it.
Right. That's good in and of itself. But um, oh, I lost my train of thought. But one of the things is that when in the midst of the that year where all this stuff was going on in Point Pleasant in the Ohio Valley, the Mothman stuff, it was like a when I give talks on it, I say, this is like a series of phantasms. I mean, none of this. There's no narrative here. It doesn't pull
Mm.
together. It doesn't make sense. And it was like it's like you're watching the previews in a movie and you're getting all these little snippets of what's coming up and you think, well, when I get to see the movie, it's all going to make sense. But in
Yeah,
this movie
yeah.
it doesn't make sense. And when you were talking about the past and the present, one of my areas of interest is of course I'm sure you're probably familiar with Jacques Vallée, Passport to Magonia and so forth. He made these phenomenal connections between folklore like the little people, the fairies and so forth,
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
and some modern day UFO experiences, and the parallels are incredible.
Yeah, I thought about that. I thought perhaps they're changing. Now they're pretending to be spacemen, whereas before they show up as pixies and different things and this and that. Perhaps the same things are showing up now as beings.
Right,
I've kind of looked down that kind of line myself. It's a sort of way of thought I've been going to for a while. I don't know. There's so much involved in this whole UFO thing. But some people, some of these organisations, I mean, they're not interested in what I've got to say. They just want like shiny UFO photographs. They're
that
not interested.
that's
And
right.
it's,
They got well. A lot of people out there are have their own narrow investigation. And my when I give my talks, I say that's fine to specialize, but you need to keep that door open a little bit because I mentioned again Rosemary Ellen Guiley. She was investigating shadow people, people that would have these things appear in their
yeah,
bedrooms or whatever. Well, she
yeah.
found out that a significant percentage of them were also experiencing classic alien abduction phenomena. So who the hell would have seen that coming? There's so many.
Well,
Uh,
that's it. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I suddenly realised a couple of years ago that I used to think the UFO phenomenon um, and and the ghostly thing, the paranormal, was separate, but I don't believe they are. I
yeah,
started to come to the conclusion that they're very, very linked.
and that's what Keel presents in UFO's Operation Trojan Horse. And when I first read that book, I wasn't happy because I was a very happy ET guy. They would
Yeah,
jump out of their flying saucers with their little silver suits and collect their soil samples. And I thought, what are you trying to do here, Keel? I'm very very content.
yeah,
And
yeah,
I don't want to hear about ghosts or any of that stuff. Well, and also, I interviewed a lady that had a classic missing time. Have you had missing time, by the way? Have you ever had a situation where you think you might have some time unaccounted for?
No, I can't say I have. No, no, it's something that I've never. No, unless when I used to go out and get drunk when I was younger. It's a missing time, no, no.
Well,
But no, no, I've never experienced any sort of weird stuff like that.
well,
When I joined my work.
maybe that's when they grabbed you and they took the blood sample and thought, okay, we have to get out the breathalyzer.
I must admit that when I was looking at that UFO, that visible one on that Christmas Day evening,
Yeah,
um, that it all got a bit weird. Then I had to just go home in the end. I obviously wanted to go home and get my camera and try and take photos of this thing or film it, but it just got really weird. It was just so full on. I was looking at it thinking, oh my God. At one point, I was going to knock on everyone's door and say, hey, UFO, UFO. But it was
right.
Christmas Day evening and it was getting on for like 9 o'clock. Towards the end of the evening, nine, half nine, and all the windows were black, and it was totally, it was totally quiet because it was Christmas Day evening. And I thought, oh my God, nobody else has seen this. I'm the only one. And it was a very crazy thing. And the more I looked at it, the more I thought, gosh, I was pinching myself even, and it sounds corny, but I actually was pinching myself, saying, God, is this real? Is this real? Totally blown away. And I thought it was going to be on the news the next day. I could come down in the morning and put the telly on thinking they was going to say, oh, UFO flew across, part of Oxfordshire at low level and everyone saw it. But I never heard anything.
You wonder why it was, since this did look biological, why was it that it was visible to you in this particular time? I just
I'm
wonder if it
I'm
was
starting to
normally
wonder what it was meant. I reckon, I don't know, it's because my path with Quest for Invisible started from that day.
right. Well, it could be. It could be something that was meant to be and set you on this path. I was just wondering if it was something that maybe it lives higher up in the atmosphere. For some reason, it came lower, and because of the, I don't know, air
Well, it
pressure
was hiding
change
in
or
the fog.
something different.
It was hiding, yeah, it was hiding in the fog. There's basically, it was a thick layer of ground fog that came up, and the sky was quite sort of foggy, and basically you could only see it in its entirety when there was a thinner pocket of fog, and that'd only be for a few seconds, and it sort of like skirted the edge of this of where the ground mist came up, and well, above the houses, obviously, it's about 150 foot above the houses, but it kind of went in a straight line. It's almost like it was skirting through the mist. Not many people would have actually seen it because you just saw this sort of warm, sort of pink to orange glow. So a lot of people wouldn't have seen. Obviously, a lot of people were inside watching, Christmas television. Um, but I didn't know what to do. I considered ringing the police for 1 minute, and then I thought, well, no, they're going to think I'm, off my head or something. And don't know what, I thought it's not worth the hassle. But no, it's very, very strange. And the fact it was only going at walking pace, and it basically went directly above me. My paths crossed, and the only reason why, because my dog wanted to go back up the alleyway again. And I nearly said, no, it's too cold. But I decided to go back down. And if it wasn't for my little dog, Alfie, I would never have even looked up in the sky and saw this thing. So therefore, there would be no quest for the invisibles. None of it would have happened.
Well,
So it's
most of us really
and it
don't
looked
look up in the
familiar.
sky.
No, and it looked familiar. It was almost like I'd seen it before.
Really.
It was a really weird feeling. Yeah, it was almost like I'd seen it before. It's almost like I recognised it when I saw it deep in my mind. It was almost like, I don't know, I always felt perhaps I was meant to see it, or perhaps I'd been shown it, perhaps, in before I came into this life, incarnated into this body or
Right.
something. I don't know, but it just seemed like it
It
was meant
seemed,
to be.
as strange as it was something familiar.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Um, that's the thing, yeah. And if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't have started looking into UFOs full on and into Trevor James Constable. And the fact that it looked living, if it wasn't for that, I would never have discovered Trevor James Constable, and I would never have written the book. So everything in my life changed from that night onwards. It blew me away so much that I could never be normal again, really, after seeing it.
Well,
And
that's
10
great.
years later, I'm still doing it.
Well, in Michigan, we had the swamp gas sightings, with Dr. J. Allen Hynek back in the old
Oh
days
gosh,
saying,
yeah,
and so
yeah.
I was a kid in junior high at the time, and that
Swap
just,
gas.
yeah, I know, that fueled my imagination. And if my buddy Kevin hadn't gone to New York and brought back that book of Trevor James Constable, I wouldn't have been on this
Mm.
track, and I wouldn't be talking to you here tonight. Uh,
No, no, it's strange how it all works out, isn't it?
yes, and so for now and recently, the strange stuff, the paranormal stuff has pretty much subsided for you.
It seems to have done, yeah, and I've also lost the
Okay,
fear. I kind
good.
of, it was almost like these things were feeding on fear, I thought. And then one night I just got real angry, and obviously I got rid of the mirror, and then the dogs slowly calmed down again, and it just seems to have gone. And I've gone back to kind of just getting on with the normal, nighttime UFO photography. And I mean, I'm just more concentrating on the skies at the moment, really, or sort of just at head height in sort of wooded areas and things towards the edge of my research area. So yeah, no, I haven't had any strange things happening anymore. It's weird. It's almost like something I went through mentally. It was almost like I was tuned into that realm for a while, perhaps. I don't know. It was very weird. And I've not caught any more entities since. I've taken thousands of more photos. Never had any more Geiger counter hits near the greenhouse. Never felt there was anything in my room.
But you're
But
still
I've got some
getting,
great photos through that.
yes, but you're still getting some phenomenal shots of bioforms.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. Yeah, well, I'm concentrating on those at the moment. But yeah, and it's almost like they know that I'm looking, so they're showing themselves up, showing themselves to me. So yeah, I think that it's all to do with I think they connect. They know you're looking for them. I think all consciousness is one ultimately. So I think there's a connection to some of these other intelligences. But as you said with Trevor, it's once you open up the door to these things, it's very hard to shut the door. I mean, luckily he was okay, wasn't he?
Yes,
He stopped doing the
yes.
channeling stuff.
And as you told me that your book Quest for the Invisibles is a tribute to Trevor James Constable,
That's right. Yeah,
who died in
yeah.
2016. And it's kind of nice. I'd like to think that the show is a little bit of a tribute to him too,
Oh,
because it
definitely.
has
Yeah.
certainly influenced both of us. And I went from thinking that not knowing if he was on the level or not to believing that he was truly a pioneer into something truly amazing. Uh, we're getting close to the end of our time, Nick. Could you
Mm.
give all your websites and all that good stuff again? The people can contact you.
Yeah, yeah. So the book is Quest for the Invisibles, and if you just Google Quest for the Invisibles, you'll see it come up. It's on Amazon. It's available in quite a few places. The website is www.questfortheinvisibles.co.uk. I'll say that again: www.questfortheinvisibles, all one word, um, .co.uk. And I've also got a YouTube channel which is called the QFTI YouTube channel. That's the name I've got on there, QFTI, and that'll come up when you do a search for Quest of Invisibles or Nick Hayes, and you see loads of footage on there, lots of live video footage I've taken of some of these things that I've been talking about tonight. And of course, there's a paper that's just been, well, part one of it's just been published, and that's on it's called the JPOT website, which is www. It's PSYCHORGON. It's basically psychorgon.com. So PSYCHORGONE.com. It's basically the Journal of Psychology and Orgone Therapy, but they deal with anything orgone related. So basically, the part one of the paper is actually on there. If you just Google, the paper is called Positive Findings on Constable's Organotic Bioforms. So if you're interested, you just Google it. You'll find it on the website. And part two, which is my evidence, because part one covers the GRCU and Trevor and some other evidence. But part two should be out in about another 2 or 3 weeks.
Okay, that's good.
Um,
And the
but I will
image.
put a link to that on the website. Yeah.
Okay, good deal. And the orgone, of course, is something that Wilhelm Reich came up with, which is essentially the life force. And
Yeah,
too
life
much.
chi prana. Yeah, people
Yes,
call it chi
right.
prana. Yeah,
Too
it's life force. It's
too
basically life
much.
force.
Too much to recap here, but very integral part of the whole thing with Trevor Constable and this kind of research. And also go back and listen to part one of this interview as well. Nick, I cannot thank you enough for being here because this has been, these past two shows have been fantastic. And I really hope you'll come back very soon because I know you've got a lot more to talk about.
I'd love to. Yeah, no, thanks for having me on. Thanks for having me on. It's great. I love talking about this sort of stuff. Yeah, no, whenever. I'm
Okay.
always there
And
to come on. Yeah.
and you can always contact me too. As long as they let me do this, you definitely will be back on the show. As long as they don't shut me
Yeah.
the door. So again, uh, thank you, Nick Hayes, for being here on the High Strangeness Factor.
That's a
And don't
pleasure.
don't don't forget, ladies and gentlemen, Quest for the Invisibles. You need to buy that book. And sit tight, Nick. I'm going to do my closeout. I'll talk to you for a couple minutes after the show.
Okie
And
doke.
and I also need to thank Irene Allen Block and Mark Johnson, and they are fearless leaders here on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. Andy Mercer, who is going to be sorry he missed this, is my part-time co-host and also my full-time producer, and he makes the show sound pretty good, at least as good as it's going to sound. Also, I want to thank Brian Zeller, who does the original music for the show. I can be heard weekly on Mac Maloney's Military X-Files on the same network as a correspondent. And I am Steve Ward, your humble host here on the High Strangeness Factor, a displaced Yank here on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. Thanks for listening. I will see you all again in a fortnight. Take care.